He wants proof that eternity is finite, so he orders a door built where space has no walls. He laces a hyperspace equation with Sith runes and Kyber harmonics, keying the lattice to fear, obedience, and his chosen blade. He assigns the blade, Darth Vader, to command a spear of ships and to harvest what lies beyond in the name of order. The engines sing, the ritual bites, and instruments report an impossible vector, negative mass in a sea of storming souls. On the fifth heartbeat, the spear falls sideways through light and burns into another universe. The sky above Vigilus goes from bruised purple to white, as if a wound is being cauterized in the firmament. He wants proof that eternity is finite, so he orders a door built where space has no walls. He laces a hyperspace equation with Sith runes and Kyber harmonics, keying the lattice to fear, obedience, and his chosen blade. He assigns the blade, Darth Vader, to command a spear of ships and to harvest what lies beyond in the name of order. The engines sing, the ritual bites, and instruments report an impossible vector, negative mass in a sea of storming souls. On the fifth heartbeat, the spear falls sideways through light and burns into another universe. The sky above Vigilus goes from bruised purple to white, as if a wound is being cauterized in the firmament, and everyone who looks up feels their teeth ache. Workers in the Hyperia sprawl shield their faces with blistered sleeves, while the hive's void shields stammer and the air tastes like hot copper. On Auspex towers, Mechanicus adepts mouth Binharic prayers as a shadow eclipses an entire industrial district, a ship so long it makes hab blocks look like sand grains. Vox traffic jams into a keening roar, reports of angels, of diamonds, of yet another enemy, of salvation shaped like a dagger. On the bridge of the superstar destroyer, men stand a little too straight because the dark figure at the viewport never moves. He wants proof that eternity is finite, so he orders a door built where space has no walls. He laces a hyperspace equation with Sith runes and Kyber harmonics, keying the lattice to fear, obedience, and his chosen blade. He assigns the blade, Darth Vader, to command a spear of ships and to harvest what lies beyond in the name of order. The engines sing, the ritual bites, and instruments report an impossible vector, negative mass in a sea of storming souls. On the fifth heartbeat, the spear falls sideways through light and burns into another universe. The sky above Vigilus goes from bruised purple to white, as if a wound is being cauterized in the firmament, and everyone who looks up feels their teeth ache. Workers in the Hyperia sprawl shield their faces with blistered sleeves, while the hive's void shields stammer and the air tastes like hot copper. On Auspex towers, Mechanicus adepts mouth Binharic prayers as a shadow eclipses an entire industrial district, a ship so long it makes hab blocks look like sand grains. Vox traffic jams into a keening roar, reports of angels, of diamonds, of yet another enemy, of salvation shaped like a dagger. On the bridge of the superstar destroyer, men stand a little too straight because the dark figure at the viewport never moves, and everyone who looks up feels their teeth ache. Workers in the Hyperia sprawl shield their faces with blistered sleeves, while the hive's void shields stammer and the air tastes like hot copper. On Auspex towers, Mechanicus adepts mouth Binharic prayers as a shadow eclipses an entire industrial district, a ship so long it makes hab blocks look like sand grains. Vox traffic jams into a keening roar, reports of angels, of diamonds, of yet another enemy, of salvation shaped like a dagger. On the bridge of the superstar destroyer, men stand a little too straight because the dark figure at the viewport never moves. Vader's breath is a metronome for fear, steady and merciless. The vessel's crew, thousands, workstations that hum with a machine logic this galaxy does not recognize. Their Navi computers blink with equations that glow like fever. Planetary mass, near-terrestrial. Defensive lattice, archaic, partially void-capable, reports Admiral Piet. Voice dry, though his throat is wet with sweat. Vader lifts a hand, and the ship tilts half a degree starboard, bringing the belly batteries into alignment with the wounded sky. On Vigilus, Lord Governor Maria Cauldron stands within a Vox-warded bunker below the Hyperia seat, surrounded by picked screens, shedding static like snow. Her face is etched by ashline and duty. "Confirm identification," she orders, gesturing at the blade hull that now eats the horizon. Not Astartes, not Mechanicus, not any known mark. A junior officer whispers the word Xenos and swallows it when her eyes cut across him like a chain blade. Inquisitor Severine Holt, Ordos Xenos, receives the same picked feed in a sealed sanctum cell 5 levels deeper. She registers the geometry before she registers the fear it creates. Her mind picks at the wrongness, too clean, too linear, too contemptuous of the machine spirits to be sanctioned artifice. She requests kill rights on anything that drops without a sigil. She does not receive them yet. The Executor's transit burned a hole in the weather. Clouds cough apart. Lightning unwinds in threads that cling to the ship's skin and then crawl away, dissipating as if ashamed. Vader extends his sense and finds a sea boiling with screams that never end, the warp pressing up against his mind like a crowd against a window. It is not the Force, but it rhymes. He pushes it away. There is a city, there is disorder. There are intelligences broadcasting in a discipline that feels like religion cosplaying as war. "Governor," says a new voice on Cauldron's Vox, cutting through stacked priority codes no one authorized. The accent is unfamiliar, clipped, imperial in the way all empires are. "This is Admiral Piet, Command Authority of the Executor Battle Group. You are under fire. We will interpose." Cauldron's eyes flick to the external feeds that have been ugly for days. A chaos flotilla threading the system edge. A war band testing Vigilus with bombardments tuned to terror rather than conquest. Her own fleet is hobbled and late. "If you can interpose, then do so," she says, swallowing the reflex to condemn. "Your authorization." The line fuzzes with a politeness that sounds like steel. "We will interpose," repeats the voice, and cuts the connection. Vader lowers his hand and the ship obeys. Ventral batteries breathe. Turbo lasers stitch the upper atmosphere in needlepoint lines that look too delicate to be lethal until each line blossoms into a lance trajectory, intercepting falling macro shells mid-arc and vaporizing them before their shock can blossom across hive roofs. Tractor beams, invisible except for the way the air buckles, seize superheated slag and flick it aside into carefully chosen dead zones outside the city's air intakes. TIE Defender squadrons uncouple and tilt like black drakes, thrust vectoring hard to catch drop pods that burn with unclean fire. Codex note: a ventral axial battery can throw a coherent pulse through turbulent atmosphere if the deflector geometry is slaved to the beam. It is not faith that prevents the thunderstorm from quenching it, but math. The hive sees the proof first. Roof gangers on a smelter spire watch a red-hot cylinder, big as a tram, veer mid-fall as if yanked by an invisible chain, skip the spire by meters, and strike a waste crater where it buries itself and detonates out of sight. A child on a hab roof stares at the black darts that scream overhead and clip the wings off something that howls scripture as it falls. A Medicae team on a promenade looks up in the terrible quiet between anti-air barrages and sees a green fireball unravel into harmless sparks. On the Executor, the cost shows in dials and in men. Deflector coherence at 91, cause a tech. Atmospheric attenuation higher than modeled. Reactor heat up trending red at. Admiral, we'll clip limits inside 10 minutes if we maintain this atmospheric profile. Piet drags a palm down his face. The ritual-augmented jump left hairline fractures in the ship's Kyber detector arrays, invisible to the naked eye but singing in the telemetry. The crew don't have those words. They have nosebleeds and a metallic taste. Vader has nothing but the task. Stormtroopers deploy. Lambda shuttles slice down from hangar caverns and flare their struts onto a manufactorum yard still strobing from near misses. White armored silhouettes form lines with an economy that looks like cruelty, until one sees what they are doing. Blocking blast wind, dragging civilians behind them, forcing lanes through chaos. An AT-AT's head clears a plume of steam, eyes glowing, legs hissing, as it steps down a cargo ramp like a god trying not to crush ants and failing with every third step. Vox in Gothic hammers them. Halt, identify, prostrate, cease movement under penalty of summary burning. Vader's troopers don't know the words. They do the work. Inquisitor Holt is moving before anyone can stay her. She walks through the bunker's inner gate, past the warded gatekeepers whose axes hum with contained hate. You will not contact them, she tells Cauldron without preamble, without me on the line or at your side. Cauldron's nostrils flare. You want this city. Bring me a fleet, she says. And the telepathic quiver under her words is pure fear, forced to stand upright. Holt's gaze doesn't blink. I want this city to still believe in the Emperor by dusk, she replies. We will need to act as if faith and survival are the same thing. Outside, faith becomes survival. The Chaos Flotilla recognizes a new player and answers with a seriousness usually reserved for Astartes. Macro cannon barrages re-time to saturate the sky where the Executor's beams have been most precise. Warp-touched fighters claw at the air, wings leaving contrails like bleeding calligraphy. A cruiser, hull covered in parchments that smolder with moving text, makes a deliberate suicide vector toward the upper atmosphere to break up and rain sanctified shrapnel on the hive. Target that cruiser, Piet orders, and the fire control crews overperform because the alternative is the dark figure turning. Recommend long stick ion, Admiral, says a gunnery officer, voice brisk. Disable and steer with tractors. Do it. Blue spears snap out. Ion cascades like rain, arching over cloud and striking hard. The enemy ship shudders, lights strobing like a heartbeat out of time. Then the Executor's tractors reach invisibly, grip the massive corpse, and begin to move it. Its mass a problem solved by a patience that feels like contempt. They lay it down in the ocean. Vader turns from the viewport for the first time. The mask's black gaze shifting to a hololithic projection showing the city's strata in ugly detail. Land armor, he says, voice like a furnace door opening. Hold high approaches. Establish fire corridors. No bombardment inside the hive's shield boundary. Men repeat him because repetition makes survival real. In the manufactorum yard, a stormtrooper sergeant named Del Vask cannot hear those orders over the scrap metal thunder of the AT-AT, but he knows them because they are the same everywhere. Make lanes, stack bodies only when they must be stacked, move forward and even when the orders coming will be worse. He lifts a man with both hands, who has been reduced by shrapnel to a problem of bandages and spine. The man claws at his helmet and croaks, "Which god Emperor?" Vask says nothing. He does not know what the word Emperor means here, and there are bullets in the answer. The first contact comes when an Adeptus Arbites column skids around a heap of cindered hab block and slams into the stormtrooper line like a wall skidding into a wall. Black carapace, shotguns held at shoulder, eagle sigils on their chests. White carapace, blasters shouldered, frown marks on their armor. Both sides yell a challenge neither understands. A woman in scale, vox bead glowing, makes a decision and raises her palm flat. The nearest stormtrooper mirrors her, palm flat, a human shape suddenly under all that white. They hold. "By what authority do you land?" the Arbites officer shouts, iron in her voice that had to be forged once upon a time from fear and drill. "By the authority of the Emperor," breathes the vocoder. There is a silence that is not quiet. Then someone laughs in a high, broken way, and it is not a healthy sound. At orbit edge, the Chaos Flotilla's real play reveals itself. While Vigilus stares at the blade in its sky, a second wave slips in on a warp-flecked trajectory. The kind machine spirits hate and human minds won't track. The first wave was a test. The second is a knife. The knife aims at the orbital docks and the auger stations and the Vox towers that give the hive its sense of being more than itself. The Executor's strike wings are already extended. They cannot be everywhere. "Admiral," says the sensor officer, "we have emerging contacts on the far plane. Their signatures are anomalous." The man wants to say haunted and does not. "Commit the Interdictor," Piet answers, jaw set. "I want gravity where there was none." The smaller cruciform cruiser slips from the Executor's lee like a second thought weaponized, projectors spooling up, space like taut rope ready to be grabbed. Holt watches the tactical slate and sees the knife turn toward her city's lungs. "Tell your blade," she says to Cauldron, refusing to look like she is begging, "that if they can keep our Vox Tower standing, I will give them leave to land under my seal for 1 hour. Cauldron nods once. The words taste like acid. She hates them. She signs them. The permission arrives as Piet is about to order something irreversible for the sake of speed. He edits nothing, only adds, "We are sanctioned to land for 1 hour, he tells Vader. 1 hour, Vader repeats, and no one on the bridge thinks of clocks as numbers anymore. They think of them as throats. The Executor's hangars empty themselves with discipline. Spearhead shuttles dive again, this time with crate stacks slung and repulsors tuned to the hive's gravity like a song learned on the fly. They bring prefabs that snap apart with a hiss and become field shrines to order. Shield pylons that drink heat and feed it back to deflectors, sensor spines, portable projectors that talk in the ship's language to the planet's shield harmonics and offer translation in the currency. All machines respect. Work done well. The Mechanicus arrives like red rust incarnate, robes snapping in the heat, implant eyes whirring. Archmagus Lum Tertius manifests at the Manufactorum Yard's edge, surrounded by Skitarii, whose rifles point at everything, even the sky. His voice is many voices when he speaks. "These constructs are unblessed abominations," he says of the shield pylons that assemble themselves with an elegance no forged world would dare. "And yet they stand at our city's gate." His mechadendrite taps a metal prayer. "We will catalogue and contain. We will also not be fools. Do you own faith, Magos?" Holt asks, without turning her head. "No," says the machine choir. "I own outcomes." The Executor's Interdictor lays a net across the sky. Transits that would have been jagged lines become bent curves, slow enough to target and murder. Word-bearer frigates blister under sudden fire. A howl rises across the city, not planetary and not civilized, as demons thin like smoke when wind finally remembers its job. The war gets quieter by measurable degrees. The quiet makes people cry who have not cried for a decade. Stormtroopers and Arbites take a stairwell together under fire. One carries a riot shield stamped with an aquila. The other uses it like cover without irony. They move in a line so tight it looks like a drill. A traitor guard squad in oil-stained fatigues opens on them from a mezzanine and dies in a pattern that would read as mercy if plotted on a schematic. When the last man falls, the Arbites officer, who is not yet given her name because names are for after, grunts. You shoot like judges. The Stormtroopers' vocoder turns the words flat. We are, he says. Soldiers. They do not agree or disagree beyond that. In orbit, a Chaos Grand Cruiser lights its drives for a shove around the edge of the Interdictor's reach. It will slingshot and fire blind into the hive because blind fire to them is a sacrament. Vader senses it, no instrument needed, because intent is a weight, and this ship is a thrown rock. Bring the dorsal batteries to bear, he says, and the Executor obeys like a knife learns the hand that uses it. He reaches out with the force and feels the enemy ship's captain for an instant. His fear a riff he has played, his hate a verse in a song that Vader no longer hears as music. He twists. On Vigilus, it looks like the sky hiccups. In space, it looks like a ship's spine remembers it has joints and flexes where joints were never meant to be. The Grand Cruiser folds, unfolding, something between fire and a crushed accordion. It dies without drama. On the Executor's bridge, there is only the hiss of Vader's breath and the needle scratch of instruments resetting to zero like they are relieved. Deflector coherence at 80 comes the next call. Cheerful because the numbers have stopped falling so fast. Reactor heat normalized to yellow. The crew are learning this world's air like an animal learns a new den by bleeding into it. Vader stares down at the hive for a long beat and says, "Hold." The hour hardens into something usable. The city's defenses click, grind, and finally sync with the stranger's math. Holt moves with the kill team and does not shoot anyone who wears white. Not yet. She arrives at a makeshift command post under a cathedral buttress repurposed as signal mast. There is a table. On one side, Governor Cauldron. Hair pinned back with a steel pin she pulled from a broken door. Calm because she has no other option. On the other side, a holonode projecting Admiral Piet's sharp face and the ghost geometry of his ship's command logic. "You have landed under a time limit," says Holt, cutting into the mutual staring like a surgeon cuts into skin. "And you have prevented a rain of fire upon my world. Both facts are true." Piet nods as if someone has read out the weather. "We will require fuel," he says, and it is declarative because need is not a question. "And ore and craftsmen to understand your gravity. We will give you this quiet every day you can name in return." Holt's laugh is a bark. "Every day we can name. There are not many we can name in advance anymore." Cauldron lifts a palm. "We will grant continued landing under sanction," she says carefully, "for the duration of this assault and no longer, provided you submit a representative to our authority for doctrinal review." She feels the Mechanicus's tension like a cold brush on her neck, and the Arbites like a hand on a pistol hilt. The storm outside cracks a different way. "Doctrinal review," repeats Piet, expression unreadable even to himself, and he glances aside, small as a man can be allowed to be with that presence at his shoulder. Lord Vader will attend. The word Lord makes the room's oxygen change. Holt's head tilts. "Your master?" she asks. "Our Lord," says Piet, and it sounds like a placeholder for something he does not have a word for in Gothic. Cauldron does not flinch when the black figure steps into the projection's field, but the men around her do. He has presence like a gravity well. He says nothing. He looks at people, and they fold their arguments where they stand and tuck them into their belts, because anyone can see debate with this man would be a fight rather than a talk. "Very well," says Holt, because to be seen deferring in front of a god that is not hers would be a wound Vigilus cannot afford. "You will attend, under oaths and awards, under blanks if I can find any left alive in this city. The last word is a lash. Vader's head inclines by a precise degree that could be respect or calculation or a trick of the mask. We will attend, he says, and we will hold your sky. The interlude ends when the Chaos Flotilla, denied spectacle, commits atrocity. A word-bearer gunship slants low over a Chemvat township and opens its belly. The payload is not fire, but a choir, a membrane that snaps in the wind and spills liturgy tuned to the pitch of human panic. People stumble, scream, claw their ears, obey the words by killing themselves because the words are written to be obeyed. A Stormtrooper unit turns to shoot the source and half of them turn their guns on their own faces in the same motion. Something in the warp laughs, and it has too many mouths. Vader feels the laughter touch him like a thread at the base of his skull. It is not the Emperor's will. It is a will that does not break under his hand because it will not stand to be grasped. He moves. A hand closes and the gunship's choir stops mid-chant, as if a throat was pinched shut. The hull crumples like paper and falls. He stands very still afterward, as if stillness can be armor against something that is not fire and not words, but both at once. The hour passes, and they have a city that is not dead. It is not much, and it is everything. The cost is visible everywhere. Men with blank eyes, women with blood in their ears, machines that hum wrong because they had to work beside unblessed tools. Holt sends runners for blanks and for incense, for psychers and for purity seals, for anyone who can draw a circle in salt and mean it. Cauldron signs a parchment with a stylus that shakes and authorizes what she swore she would never authorize. A compact with strangers at gunpoint. The Executor rolls, a slow, predatory motion that creates wind at ground level. Its flanks are scored now, micro pits where the warp's breath touched and did not burn because math says no, but still left a taste. The crew log the anomalies. The engineering teams open panels they have never opened and do not say they smell something not in their manuals. Piet reads the numbers and calculates how long before costs outpace gains. He does not tell anyone his number yet. Vader walks the hangar decks because men work better when fear walks among them, and because the mask is a mirror that makes everyone see the best discipline they have to offer. A tech drops a hydrospanner. It clangs and rolls, and the sound knifes through the dock like a superstition. Vader does not look down. "Prepare my shuttle," he says, and everything in the sentence is an order and a promise and a threat against the next 10 minutes. On Vigilus, the Vox towers still stand, though half their mast seraphs are burned. The cathedral buttress hums with signals and prayer. Holt, Cauldron, the Archmagos, the Arbites officer with no name yet, they all stand together because that is the only posture left when the sky makes new gods. The shuttle drops through rain that starts with ash and ends with water. Its landing lights paint the stone an alien white. When its ramp lowers, the air flows around a shape and becomes quiet in the way storms become quiet when they move from thunder to flood. The man in black steps down onto Vigilus and brings with him everything that word means in two galaxies. Law as weapon, survival as doctrine, mercy as a lever, terror as an instrument, order as a god. He stops before the painted aquila on the flagstones and does not step on it. He looks at Holt, at Cauldron, at the red robe thing full of prayers. The voice the mask makes is the furnace door again. "We will talk," he says, "and while we talk, we will fight." The next volley from orbit is late by a heartbeat, because men were listening to words and had to remember to work. The volley arrives anyway, prompted not by faith, but by habit. The city holds. The enemy reorganizes with the resigned fury of zealots denied their favorite fire. The hour has become a structure everyone touches, as if it were a wall. Time feels like stone. Somewhere in the smelter sprawl, a child breathes again and does not yet know which god to thank. The night has a red seam where the hive's wounds still steam, and under that seam the strangers and the faithful draw a line together and dare the dark to cross. The line is not neat. It is a snarl of barricades, servitors with hammered-in orders, Arbites' riot shields canted like slabs, Stormtroopers behind them with rifles that hum. Overhead, cables sway like vines between half-dead vox masts, and every sway looks like a hand reaching down. Somewhere far out in the black, the Executor drifts a degree and a half and turns that drift into reach. The enemy answers with noise before it answers with bodies. A word-bearer gunship comes again, but this one releases not choir membrane but a rain of burning parchment that glows with letters as it falls. The letters are names that belong to people who died here a century ago. They smoulder on flesh without flame and make eyes swell shut on memories that don't belong to the skulls that hold them. Men grip their heads and say their father's wrong names. Vader moves his palm and the wind changes. It is small at first, a pressure difference at the level of leaf and lash. Then the Manufactorum alleys become ducts, and the ducts become a throat. The burning slipskins miss the line and are drawn into a heat-sink trench, where the Mechanicus runs waste steam, at a rate the books call impossible. The trench lights with cold fire and eats the letters like an animal eats poison, if it knows to mix it with clay. A Morphine hauls itself through the smoke like a train that hates itself, all iron rage and pounding pistons. The Arbites officer without a given name yet, face masked, badge stamped, plants her boots, embraces her shield and thinks, "This is where I die," and people watch. The trooper next to her takes a half step and fires a snapshot at an exposed feed line that glows from within. The bolt is wrong for this world but right for that seam, and the demon engine coughs fire backward into itself. It staggers. An AT-ATSA foot comes down like a judge's seal and pins. There is an awful sound that is metal and not. On the far approach, storms of tracer fire cross like writing. Interdictor gravity to Vector Theta 7. Pied orders. Eyes on thin, moving runes of friend and foe. No dorsal fire beyond line 8. Heard them. The interdictor's wells breathe in space tenses. Dropships that would have slit through at angles now slide. Their courses becoming curves the Executor's gunners have solved 1,000 times in 1,000 drills that never smelled like burning human hair. Turbo lasers walk those curves with an unmusical, merciful rhythm. Stormtrooper Sergeant Del Vask holds the line where a culvert runs black, and the air above it tastes like pennies and rot. He counts breaths instead of seconds, because seconds belong to officers, and breath belongs to him. When the culvert spits out a tide of cultists with hooked blades and bleeding mouths, he does not fire. He takes 2 steps and slaps a shaped charge onto the culvert mouth, where Mechanicus chalk marks say, "Reinforced steel that hasn't been blessed in 3 lifetimes." He does not light the charge with flame, but with a cable to the portable shield pylons humming 20 meters back. The pylon phase jumps and the charge follows. The culvert collapses inward like a crushed throat. Collateral is one small hab annex that was already burned to bones. Inquisitor Holt watches it from a stair above and files the method under words the order allows for expedience. "Controlled," she says aloud, as if she is the one who gave the order and it matters to speak it that way. Her acolyte does not answer, because he is busy not looking at the black giant moving below like a statue set ashore and told to walk. The first victory arrives in fragments, rather than in a banner moment, which is the only way victories arrive on Vigilus anymore. The choir ships stop coming when enough of them are twisted mid-chant into rain, by a hand they cannot hex. The morphine dies with its spine under a foot. The culvert becomes a plug instead of a wound. The word-bearer cruiser that tried to side the Interdictor's flank finds itself drinking its own ion backwash because Piet orders the nets to flex like hands. The city breathes a full breath. Codex note: a gravity well projector cannot catch faith, but it can catch the metal that carries faith to ground, and the distinction is operational. The War Council doesn't wait for dawn because dawn is a rumor. They meet under the cathedral buttress again, but now the table is covered with more devices than parchments. The hollow of the Executor's command cone hangs above like a ghost organ. Governor Cauldron stands with her shoulders squared, as if a parade inspection could be called at any moment, and it would be her fault if her city failed. The Archmago stands like a furnace that learned to pretend to be a man. The Arbites officer stands because chairs are for after. Holt stands because if she sits, she will have to admit fatigue to muscle and bone in a way faith does not forgive easily. Piet stands in light because his body can do nothing else from there. Praise is due, Cauldron says without sweetness. We asked you to interpose. You interposed. You kept your fire clean. The Manufactorum districts still function. Our dead are counted in scores, not hundreds. She looks at Holt when she says it, making sure the Ordo sees her being gracious with Doctrine still in the room. Holt's mouth tightens. Doctrine and gratitude are enemies that sit at the same table when cities live. You mitigated their rituals, Holt says to Vader, voice weightless by will. That is acceptable. The pause contains a garden of thorns. You will submit the theory to our adepts, the Archmago says, a whir of fans under words. Your pylons speak a dialect to our shields that is profane and effective. Both traits create a ledger we must balance. Vader's mask is a mirror that refuses to return a face. You require outcomes, he says, the breath making the sentence like a metronome. So do I. Let us speak of mercy, the Arbites officer says suddenly, cutting across the lanes of rank because people died in front of her and the air still tastes wrong. Your soldiers held fire inside the shield boundary when they could have turned whole blocks to glass and called it clean. Her chin lifts toward Piet's ghost. Was that mercy or control? Piet doesn't flinch. It was doctrine, he says. Collateral gives you compliance for a day. Precision gives you compliance for a year. Terror is a tool. So is the memory that a soldier lifted a man out of blast wind instead of letting him burn. Holt's eyes are knives. She uses them on him like a test. We do not call terror a tool, she says, because the word has a resonance in Gothic that has to be cut short in the air before it spreads. We call it sin when wielded by the enemy, and necessary when sanctified by our hand. She does not believe in hypocrisy. She believes in instruments ordained. Your order, she nods at Vader, is order enforced by fear. So is ours, if we are honest enough to speak it. The difference is patronage. Freedom, Cauldron inserts, and the word sounds odd in her mouth, like a foreign spice. My citizens have never had it. They have had work and law and fear and sometimes bread. You, her gaze slants up at the hollow's architecture, offer work, law, fear, and quiet skies. If they call that freedom because the sky is quiet, I will not correct them loudly. I will correct them by making the quiet theirs and not yours. Vader says nothing for a long breath, and then the furnace door opens. Mercy is the face you give inevitable force, he says. We will be merciful where mercy upholds order. We will be surgical where surgery preserves function. We will be total where totality prevents rot. Holt hears rot and hears heresy's other name. We preserve souls, she answers. Function is not a sacrament. The Archmagos pings a meter of a prayer. Function is, he says, a sacrament in the Lex Mechanic Catechism. The Arbites officer, whose name is Kest under her mask, says, "Function keeps mothers' hands clean enough to hold their children. I have room for many sacraments when that is true." Piet lets the wind of talk pass and then drops the map. "We can maintain an interposition," he says crisp, "because numbers are simpler than theology. We have a cost vector that increases the longer we hold atmosphere with our ship as a lens. Fuel, heat, structural resonances from our entry method that require rebalancing of field emitters according to a metric we did not bring enough text to love properly." He does not say Kyber. He does not say Sith. He says emitters. We will need ore. We will need fuel. We will need ground sites where we can anchor our mat to your stone. Quid pro quo at the edge of apocalypse. Holt murmurs. Not unkind and not kind. We can give you ore. Fuel is harder. Our promethium is promised to a dozen fronts. Our nobles will sell you water before they sell you fire. Cauldron's mouth makes a hard smile. We can raid what our enemies brought to burn us, she adds. They always carry more than they need, because abundance is their liturgy. Then we're agreed, says a voice none of them wanted to belong to anyone outside their circle. It belongs to the warp and speaks through a big screen that wasn't switched on. Letters rearrange themselves and become a mouth that grins. Holt's acolyte swears a prayer that has 4 syllables, each of which is a sin, if you believe sin has phonemes. The mouth laughs and becomes a symbol that dates to a heresy older than the hive. The symbol speaks word-bearer scripture in a register that cracks a glass on the floor and makes the Archmagos' minor auspexes all show the same number, 0. Cut it, Cauldron orders, and a servitor smashes the screen with a mace that looks like a relic until you see the grease on its head. They test our lines, Holt says, breathing measured. They find our ears even when we hide them. Vader's head fractionally turns. All the acknowledgement he gives a taunt. We will cut their tongue, he says, and no one in the room mistakes it for metaphor. They plan the cut in 4 sentences because speed is more moral than thoroughness tonight. A Quire engine hub in the ash waste broadcasts the mimetic payload that turned a street into a suicide. The hub sits in a circle of bone-colored pylons that drink the warp and spit it in meter. It will take a mechanist's hand and a judge's will and a soldier's arithmetic to stop it without cratering the surrounding refugee camp, whose inhabitants will become demons if their dying is made loud. We go, says Holt, and the room looks at her like looking is part warning and part invitation. I have blanks, she adds, because she knows the black figure will say yes if she wraps the request in null. They move before the room can remember to be afraid of its own decision. A squad of stormtroopers, white armor ash-dulled, follows Holt and Kest out through a gate that saints once passed, and that tonight sanctifies men who never believed in saints. The Archmagos sends 2 Skitarii with data tethers leashed to a cogitator slab like hounds to a machine fox. Above them, a TIE Defender pair flies so low the buildings suck at their wings, engines pitching down to not wake the city as if sound discipline were kindness. The ash wastes are a skin of glass laid over old scars. The pylons stand there like teeth, each etched with runes that argue with the wind. Between them, the Quire engine throbs on a beat that doesn't belong to seconds or hearts. Holt's blanks move ahead and make the air flat in a way living air hates. The stormtroopers targeting reticles twitch like wolves smell something they don't understand. Kest makes the first move because that is how she reads oath. She goes in under shield and takes the first hail of thorn bullets and answers them with a slab of law and a riot gun's thump. A cultist throws a chain blade and loses a hand to a white blade that hums and drinks color from the air around it. Vader doesn't speak here. He cuts. He aims at the pylons, not at the men, because the engine is the throat and the choir is only breath. The Archmagos' Skitari plug their tethers into the engine's throat, and the engine tries to swallow them like sacrament. Data spills into the tethers, scrap code in spikes and spirals, words that name machine spirits by their true names, words that make men bleed from their nose if they hear them. The Skitari do not have the kind of nose that bleeds. They have heat sinks and prayers to unknown saints of logic. They cannot tame the engine. They can make it cough. A tie skims in, low enough to pull dust like a cape, and flicks a concussion missile sideways at a rib of rock, not at the engine. Rock avalanches with surgical rudeness and lands exactly where it will break 2 pylons without burying the camp. The choir's pitch drops a note. Men stop clawing their faces. A blank steps up to the engine and her skin goes grey like paper. She holds a seal in her palm, and the seal is not scripture. It is emptiness given a shape. The engine's song collapses inward like a throat trying to swallow nothing. Vader steps once and cuts the heart. Silence falls as a weight, and then noise comes back in pieces that are human. Sobs, coughs, blasphemies that mean nothing, because no one is listening to them the right way anymore. Kest leans on her shield and breathes like a woman who has been told by a kind doctor that she can stand down for 5 minutes and it will not kill anyone. Holt touches the blank shoulder and feels nothing at all. Not skin, not warmth, which is almost mercy, because it means she does not feel how much that was. They do not cheer. There is no cheering in this war. They mark the engine side with a flare that burns a color the Executor's surveyors have been taught to see through cloud and smoke. They leave their dead and do not have to look away. There are none. Control collateral means your hands shake later instead of now. Back at the table, the praise arrives on the same breath as the anxiety. You cut the tongue, Cauldron says, and this time there is a ghost of a smile that isn't weaponized. Controlled, Holt says again. To remind herself she believes in the adjective. The Archmagos stares at the data stack vomited by the engine into his leash slate and says, "We have communion with an unblessed language." His mecha dendrites coil and uncoil like thinking snakes. I will quarantine and I will also learn. Piet's eyes flick across the same packet mirrored up to the Executor, and he thinks, scrap code or malware or hex. The word is secondary to the outcome. Holt puts her palm on the table and stands straighter, as if to receive a blow or to deliver one. Now doctrine, she says. You will submit your lord to wards. He is a psyker, and the word is indictment and necessity both. Even if your lexicon says otherwise, he will be tested, he will be watched, he will be bound if need be. She squares herself to the mask. We do not give free license to any power that smells like the warp, even when it saves us. Vader does not react in any way a man would recognize, and yet the room feels for a moment like the air is thinner by a layer. You will bind what you can hold, he says. You will not bind what you cannot. I have agreed to attend. I will do so. Holt's chin lifts and sets. I will bring blanks to the audience, she adds, because she understands leverage in languages not her own. I will bring my lord's sanction, Vader replies, and now it is unclear if the mask means 2 different men when it uses the word lord. They do not get to continue that thread to its ugly knot because the alarm makes a noise none of their alarms have made before. It is lower, older, a furnace moan pressed through stone. Pick screens flower with a geometry that looks like frost. The Executor's telemetry smears into fur on the edges, like a painter pressed his thumb into wet lines. Anomalous resonance calls a voice from orbit that does not have the luxury of panic. Multiple spikes from the ash wastes, frequency matches, bannered structures. He gropes for the word. Noctilith arrays. They all look at the Archmagos because that is where you look when stones begin to sing. Loom Tertius's eyes click through 3 apertures and lock on the map. Blackstone, he says. And all the other words in his throat are prayers that sound like diagnostics. Warp damping. Psychic negation. The crown pattern. But this is not passive. It is being played like an instrument by hands that hate truth. The hollow zooms. A crown of standing shards angles up out of a crater field, where mining rigs lie like peeled bones. It throb pulses in blue-black, and every pulse makes Vader's shoulders set in a way only Piet notices. Power scaling. Interlude. Noctilith eats resonance. The Executor's guns and shields, the lightsaber in Vader's hand, the precognitive wash he moves in. They all rely on coherent fields tuned to themselves. Blackstone introduces phase noise that makes coherence stagger. A blade that never stutters now hums against its own edge. Scrapcode rides the black pulses as a carrier wave and speaks to machines without asking their litanies, offering unsolvable equations that make logic stall like a heart skipping a beat. Null fields throw grit into the Force in a way that is not the Jedi's calm, but an absence with teeth. Gravitic wells can be made to bend crooked if the field is skinned with Noctilith. Predictions curve in ways no computer modeled. Dark mechanicum, Holt says, spitting the words like she is trying to clear blood from her mouth. They've yanked a crown out of a tomb and wired it into a chaos song. The Archmagos' tendrils flex toward the hollow as if he could strangle the image. Abominable union, he hisses, more human than machine for a flaw of a second. The crown will eat witchlight and spit emptiness. It will also eat any coherence you brought with you, off-worlder. Your key. He stops because a word rises, and he does not have a catechism for it. Your crystals that sing. They will sing wrong. Piet feels the lights dim a fraction on his bridge in a way no instrument reports. The crew shift weight, senses picking up what dials are not awake enough to admit. Compensate with hard lines, he orders. Cut wireless where you can without losing hands. Tell the fighter screens to go to dumb guns. No reliance on sensor fusion for targeting inside any region that pings negative. He is already drawing circles where he will not trust his ship to be itself. Kest cracks her knuckles because this is a threat that looks like something Abaddon cannot reach. So we hit it with rock again, she says. We bring down mountain on it. If we had a mountain, Cauldron replies dryly, and taps the relief. The crown sits in the middle of a broken pan, where mountains were ground into gravel to feed hives 3 wars ago. We have gravel, and we have will. Holt's eyes slit. We have blanks. We have priests who can stand in circles and not die if their faith is a kind of geometry. We have your pylons, she adds to Piet, which you will set to sing discord into their song. We have ships, Piet says. We can orbitally insert a field team onto the crown's spine and cut feeds, while you keep its teeth distracted. We will take losses if the field goes wide. The Interdictor will hold a bubble against warp shear if it can. If it can't, we will patch with deflectors and math and sweat. Vader listens and hears the places where men will die, even if the plan is beautiful. We will go, he says, and no one has the energy to argue about whether he means his hand or himself. They go with less theatre than the last raid, and more fear, because invisible teeth are worse than visible knives. The Executor's shuttles quiver as they cross the first null fringe, lights low, panels humming as if thinking through a headache. The pilots fly by gut and grit, and the way their hands remember stick drift from worlds that never smelled like this one. A storm erupts across the crown's bowl, as if weather sought to hide the sin from the sky. Lightning walks along blackstone edges and never reaches the ground. On the ground approach, Holt's blanks bleed from their noses long before any ward is drawn. Their presence is not wanted here by the stone or by the thing inside the stone. Skitarii advances slow, because their targeters loop in place, unable to resolve edge or face on the shards. Kest holds her shield up and it hums, and the hum is wrong, and she grinds her teeth to make a new tone with her skull. The first shot from the crown is not a shot, it is a pulse. It rolls across the manufactory flats, and every picked slate within 2 kilometers shows a childhood drawing of the Emperor, crude and hopeful for the length of a breath, and then burns out. Men stop, some drop to knees. A few laugh because the alternative is screaming. The next pulse takes 3 Stormtroopers' rifles and makes them eject their power packs with loving care they did not order. They slam fresh packs in by reflex, and the packs fall out again like polite refusals. Vader walks forward into the null like a man entering cold water until it touches his throat and tries to choke him. The Force is present in a negative. It is an outline where an object would be if the object were allowed. He pushes at absence and absence pushes back. The blade in his hand gutters along its edge in a way no blade ever should. He holds it tighter and it stops complaining. Because domination is an argument even nothing understands. An enemy appears that is not chanting or charging. It is a machine that looks like a cathedral turned inward, all buttresses bent toward a mouth. Runesank bands wrap it like belts. At its heart hangs a cube that is black the way a sealed room is black. It crawls on spidery legs over the broken pan, placing itself between the crown and the men who came to kill songs. It is the Dark Mechanicum's answer to an honest question. It vomits a lattice of symbols that eat options from men's hands. Skitarii fire in a staccato that writes discipline onto air, and the lattice turns shots aside as if they decided to become rain. Holt's blank steps closer, and the machine whines because the blank is an insult to both churches it serves. Vader lifts his hand, and the machine resists because the cube at its heart is black enough to refuse. He does not crush it, he tilts it. The lattice slews sideways and Kest runs under it with her shield and slams a charge against a knee that looks like a prayer. The knee snaps and the machine goes down 1 degree, and in that degree there is room for someone else to move. Up above, shuttles fall onto the crown's upper arcs with intakes screaming and skids out, and men scramble onto stone that hates them. The first trooper to reach a feet spire vomits across his boots, and still unplugs the cable that sings up from the ground into the shard. The song shifts and everyone feels it as a taste in their teeth. A tie comes across at a wicked angle and drops a load of cable that blossoms into a net, then a web, then a grounding grid that bites into blackstone edges like silver into rot. The grid does not win. It makes the enemy lose concentration. Interdictor is holding at 60%. A bridge voice reports into Piet's ear through a channel that keeps itself from being eaten by sheer stubbornness. Gravity wells stuttering on a cadence tied to the crown's pulse. We can predict, but only 1 beat ahead. 1 beat is enough, Piet says, and it sounds like faith, because it is faith in men and training. He orders fighters across the pattern like pebbles thrown at just the right ripples to cancel the uglier ones. At the crown's base, a word-bearer dark apostle walks out of the storm, as if it is his church, and he is bored with it. His armor reads like scripture written with a knife. He carries a mace that hums against the air in a chord that tries to undo other chords. He speaks, and the words don't make sense with the ears, but they do with the fear. He points the mace at the black figure standing before him, and all the cultists who have not run or died take a knee because something is going to be sanctified here. Vader moves his person 1 line forward, and the blade lights the rain like a line drawn through ink. He does not waste words. The apostle does, because his God loves them. The mace comes in low and then up, a faint reversed, and when it meets the blade, the sound is a bite. Vader feels bite through arm and through the part of him that remembers different training halls. The mace drinks the thread of his reach and returns it as pain that has a signature. It is not a duel in the old sense, because the ground is trying to kill both of them and the sky is offering to help. It is still a duel because two wills are busy. The apostle speaks a second time and the words try to write themselves into the joints of Vader's suit. Something inside the chest cooler fans hiccups and restarts. His vision narrows. He forces it wide again. He presses. The blade does not cut the mace. It cuts the air hard enough that the mace's arc is wrong. And wrong arcs are death hidden as clumsiness. The apostle takes a step that is both retreat and prayer. Kest hits him from the other side with a rubber bullet that feels like satire to fire at power armor, until one remembers heads still have eyes. He blinks. Vader does not. The blade slips past a ward line that expected a different length, and the apostle's pauldron hiccups open. Under it, flesh that believes itself beyond injury meets light that does not believe in that belief. He goes to one knee because his knee was written by bones and bones still have rules. He tries to speak a third time and his teeth fall out of his mouth in an image his God will enjoy. He dies as if reading a line he always meant to read. The crown stutters. The lattice, the cathedral machine vomits, collapses like a diagram in rain. The null loosens half a tone. Holt's blank collapses like a puppet whose strings were cut because standing in that absence took more than a body has right to give. Holt drags her back by her belt and prays in the wrong language because all good prayers mean the same thing when someone you need has fallen down and may not get up. They cut the feeds with hand tools and stubbornness, and a noble silence the city will never hear about. The crown shrinks. It does not die. The black at its heart remembers how to refuse. The Executor's beam tracks slip a degree back toward true. Fighters report their guns bark when they ask them to bark. The Interdictor stops creaking like an old man in a cold house and breathes easier for a span of heartbeats. They do not hold it. The crown fights back with an intelligence that is an aggregate of malice and stolen logic. New spires push up through gravel, as if the ground itself learned to obey the song and sprouts black. Skitarii fire melts against angles that become right angles at the moment heat arrives. A wave of scrap code rides the next pulse, jumps through a grounded grid, follows a cable into a pylon, and from there leaps into the Executor's auxiliary comms, like a rat following a rope, to a ship. On the bridge, 3 consoles reboot in the same second without being told to. The reboot screen shows a sigil that means nothing in any codebook. A petty officer reaches to cycle it and freezes with his finger hovering because a voice in his head whispers that if he touches now, his mother will suffocate in a room without windows. He does it anyway because he is a petty officer in the Imperial Navy and superstition is a luxury reserved for shore leave. The screen dies and comes back clean, and nothing bad happens that he can feel. His hands shake after. Piet watches numbers slip and recover, slip and recover. Quarantine R, he orders. Cut it hard. If you don't need it to breathe or shoot or not fall, it sleeps. He feels his ship as a man feels his own wrists in a fall. Vader feels the same lurch in a different part of himself and breathes hard twice. The sound harsh in a way that makes men glance at the deck, because looking up would be disloyal to a fear they can address by work. Pull, Holt orders. Mouth a line that isn't giving up and isn't lying either. We have reduced it. We cannot kill it this hour. Kest drags a wounded Skitarius by his harness, while the blank staggers on feet that are suddenly hers again. A shuttle drops hard and kicks dust into a veil, under which retreat does not look like retreat. Vader backs up last, blade held low, head tilted as if listening to a song no one else can hear anymore, because the song is less loud now. They leave a crown that sulks rather than roars. The storm worries at its teeth. The refugees in the camp do not die. Control Collateral was honest this time. The enemy learned them as they learned the enemy. That is not a comfort, but it is a fact, and facts are spendable. Back at the table, the debate becomes an anatomy lesson, where the body is two empires laid on top of each other in bad light. Holt spreads reports like cards. "You saw it," she says. "Null eats your coherence. The crown is not just a rock. It is heresy you can quarry and stack into towers. They have it. They will bring 2 for every one we break. We must bind your lord before we go to the throne. I will not bring an untested witch into the aura of him on Terra's proxy." Cauldron rubs ash from under her nails with the edge of a knife, because it is either that or bite them. "Mercy," she says, because she is not done with that word. "Your soldiers carried our children. Our Arbites held a door, so white-armored men could pass and save a dozen souls. That buys you time with a city that does not have time. Use it. Submit to the wards, Lord Vader." She chooses the honorific, because someone has to civilize the conversation by pretending rank binds gods. The Archmagos speaks like a bell tolling. "We will design a ward not to break but to measure." His cables sketch in air like a sermon in machine cant. Hexagrammic circles tied to anelectro cages. Pariah proximity measured in microspans. "We will push your blade against signatures and see if it sings wrong. If it sings too wrong, we will close doors." His lenses click. Doors that might open again, or not. Piet meets Vader's mask without looking like a man hoping for permission to voice a thought. "My lord," he says quietly enough the others have to strain, but do not look like they are straining. "If the wards choke you, I will move heaven for extraction if you lift a finger. If you do not lift a finger, I will leave you to the test." The room turns its temperature down 3 degrees for that courage and the way it is offered. Vader nods once, and in the nod is the memory of many rooms where orders like that were how men kept a soul. "Prepare the audience," Vader says, and by audience he means judgment by a proxy, for a throne that is a wound covered in gold. Holt bows her head and does not let it be submission. "We will," she says. "We will also keep fighting while we prepare. The crown won't sleep, neither will we." Kess grunts, a sound half laugh and half oath. "I already wasn't sleeping." The next alarm is smaller and meaner. The scrap code that tried the aux lines doubles back down a vox line to a pylon and out into a manufactorum servo grid. Servitors turn their heads in unison and stare at a point on a wall as if a painting hung there. There is no painting. Knives rise. Holt is already moving because her acolytes have learned to read the new curves of danger and sent her a wordless tone on a bell corder. Kest runs with her, a wedge in black and metal through corridors that smell of oil and milk left too long in sun. Stormtroopers fall in with them without being asked. Vask leads, because hallways belong to sergeants. They reach the shop floor and see the first knife hand twitch. Vader's presence arrives like gravity arrives, and the knives pause in the air as if remembering they could be put down. He doesn't choke any throats. He just tips a line in the room that means obedience, and obedience seeks a better master. The Archmagos' voice crackles over a box, and for once is urgent. "Do not sever the main," he warns. "The scrap code will jump. Herd it into the ground array. I have built a trap with prayers written in numbers your ship taught me." Holt's hand goes to a lever out of reflex, born of firefights, and she snatches it back, because faith in a logic priest is faith in a god she isn't sure she wants. But the alternative is knives deciding their own liturgy. They do it his way. They move the code like cattle, slapping switches in a sequence that makes no sense except in the rhythm the Archmagos calls. The floor hums and the hum hurts teeth. Servitors twitch like dogs dreaming. The trap springs. A circle glows under a bank of presses, and the glow is ugly and true. The scrap code drains into it with a sound like insects going silent. The lights flicker. Everything stays on. "Congratulations," says the Archmagos dryly, through a dozen little blessed speakers. "You perform machine rites without being burned. I am forced to update a belief." Holt does not reward him with a smile. She is busy unclenching her hands. Vask looks at the servitors and wants to put hands on their shoulders like they are men, and does not, because they are, and because he is not sure touching a blessing just performed won't make it resent him. The report waits for them as they step out of the grimy light into the still, grimy gloom. The crown has stilled to a lower pulse, while a storm sits heavy like a wet roof. The word-bearers have drawn back enough to bait pursuit. The Interdictor breathes without wheeze. The Executor's detritus of poetic anomalies. The way the Kyber detectors hiss at nothing. The way some corridors feel longer. Subsides to a level Piet can call background and not be lying. A dozen families in the smelter sprawl eat soup that tastes like iron and say a prayer to an emperor whose sky did not fall tonight, and to a quieter god with a black face none of them will admit to naming. Cauldron closes her eyes for 6 breaths and opens them like a knife out of a sheath. "We give you a day," she tells Piet, "of ore sufficient to service your needs. You give us this quiet for as long as you can put a number to. In 2 days we convene the sanction audience." Holt's mouth opens on a correction and closes when she remembers the price of changing words from day to hour in a room like this one. 2 days, she echoes. "I will have blanks from 3 precincts and a choir trained to hold a circle without tearing. I will have questions with answers that won't fit in either of our books." Vader inclines his head, and the gesture contains both consent and inevitability. "In 2 days, he says, "we will be ready." Piet's gaze flicks across fresh lists he did not mean to write in his head, and begins to turn ore into emitters, emitters into safety, safety into leverage. The Archmagos is already walling the crown's frequencies off from his own, with a zeal he would call rational and everyone else would call piety. Kest writes a name on a slate, hers, and next to it writes Kest, because now the men in white will call her by it whether or not she gives it. The storm eases to a hard rain. Fires mutter. The crown hums lower. The city does not end. The enemy does not leave. The future waits in a room with a circle chalked on the floor and a space left for a man in black, who breathes like a machine that hates living and lives anyway. Time stretches like wire pulled across gears and holds. The map hangs in the air like a stained glass window made of numbers. Blue cones for the Interdictor's wells flex and stutter to the crown's pulse. Red sigils for word-bearer holds blink with a heartbeat that refuses to match the city's clocks. Green for assets is a thin embroidery over a torn fabric. Their goal is to peel Vigilus back to a shrine world for the wrong god, Holt says, voice flat. They will not conquer. They will harvest belief by catastrophe. Piet points with 2 fingers, because pointing with one looks like accusation, and with a whole hand looks like prayer. They are mapping our response times, he says. They push the crown until comms bend, then switch to mimetic payloads where our fighters are blind. Standard counters, ion, ECM, shield harmonics, fail under null. Hardwired lines survive. Blanks survive. Faith litanies have a damping effect we can measure. but only within meters. He taps an area where the map flickers as if ashamed. They will attempt a breach here. It aligns with both their rhythm and our weakness. Breach to what? Kerst asks, helmet tucked under one arm, hairline shining with sweat like a coronet made of work. The Archmagos zooms the overlay until the geometry in the ash waste looks like a sigil. A capillary warp gate, he says. Not a full throat, a proboscis. It will drink psychers first, then morale, then mass. His mecha dendrites sketch a curve no human priest would dare. Standard counters fail because standard assumes a door. This is a needle. Holt's palm flattens on the table. We cut the needle, she says. We hold a perimeter with blanks and choristers. We don't let them finish a sentence, let alone a sermon. She looks at Vader and measures how much of the next sentence she can afford. You go where the needle touches ground. You break the hand on it. Vader gives the inclination that means consent without concession. Deploy defenders to harry any ordnance that looks like ritual, Piet adds. If a shell carries a choir, it dies before the second verse. They move on it at dusk, when the citadel's buttresses are purple and the ash wastes are the color of old bone. The crown has shrunk into itself like an insulted animal, but it still hums in a key that makes teeth dream. The place marked for breach is a crater rim, where mining rigs once gnawed and now lie like rib cages left to dry. Censer smoke curls from braziers set on axle hubs. Word-bearers chant with their helms off, mouths red with scripture they have eaten for courage. The needle is not a thing yet. It is a taste in the air and an ache in the ears, and the way dust rises without wind. The dark mechanicum has built an armature there. Noctilith plates cut to cruel angles, flex cabling braided like rosary, a suspensor field holding a point in space open the way a surgeon holds a wound. A figure stands at the heart of it, steady as a nail. His armor is red and inscribed with patience. A lattice of blackstone segments plates his left arm like scale scripture. In his right hand, he carries a glaive whose edge refracts light into wrong shapes. Named, Holt says over Vox, because an enemy with a name is an enemy you can bury on a page. Warpsmith, Rauca Trementar, Dark Mechanicum Adjunct, Wordbearer Oathbound. The Archmagos makes a noise like a hard disk dying. Heretic, he breathes. The glaive is edge-bound Noctilith. The plates are tuned. He will make fields stutter and blades sleep. Stormtroopers spill from a shuttle like white syllables and take cover behind teeth of rock. Kest advances with a narrowed shield and a pace that says she has learned how to walk through machine prayer without flinching. Holt's blanks spread out until the air thins in a circle that creeps. The defenders slice overhead and push the braziers backward with their slipstreams. So lit, coals fall into puddles and hiss like snakes retreating. Rock turns his head and studies Vader the way a craftsman studies a tool he wants to break to see how it was made. I have waited for you, he says, Vox giving the words a dry, sore edge. Your equations are not ours. They can become ours. Vader's blade answers him with light. They meet between two ribs of an excavator that look like the skeleton of a ship that drowned on land. Rog steps in with a diagonal that is half geometry, half sin, and the black edge makes the red air around it shudder. Vader catches on the blade's high line, and the humming breaks into a cough along the saber's spine. He feels stutter run up his hands, through glove and implant, into scars that do not forgive. He presses anyway and drives the warpsmith back one pace. Hawk laughs once, recognition not joy. He turns the glaive into a pry bar, lever against the saber's field, and slides, not to cut, but to touch. Where the Noctilith edge kisses the lightsaber's corona, the blade gutters and a thin cone of raw air intrudes where light should be. That absence bites Vader's forearm through composite plate. It is not blood. It is a hole in reach. He holds. He tries the force, and the crown's sulk becomes hunger for that pressure. It eats a thin slice of push and returns a throb to his lungs. Rauch sees it and prays a new verse, fastening a cable to a sigil plate with a touch that looks obscene. The needle in the air grows sharper, a point you could prick a god with if you could get your hand there. The warpsmith comes in again, glaive writing a proof. Vader angles, takes the slide, and punches with his offhand at the joint where Noctilith and Ceramite meet. The punch is a thought wrapped in armor. The joint complains. Vask fires at Rauch's assistants, a trio of robed machine slaves who move with the synced stagger of men who traded autonomy for endurance. Each wears a reliquary full of black pebbles across his chest. When the pebbles rattle, the nearest trooper's comm goes dead. Vask shoots the reliquaries and pebbles spill like teeth. The slaves do not scream. They stand still, as if instruction ran out. Then they tip like felled trees. Rauch's glaive dips in acknowledgement of the loss, and then slashes hard at Vader's chest box. The Noctilith edge doesn't reach metal, its field does. Vader's respirator hiccups. His world narrows to a circle around air. He steps left, where pain says step right, and the glaive takes a rail, throws sparks, eats them. The saber flares again, and for an instant its note is higher, frantic the way a violin gets in the wrong hands. Rauch speaks while pressing. "You are logic forced to live," he says. "Your order would be perfect if your masters had enough stone and enough knives. My master will give you both enough." The mask returns him nothing but the breath that dares calling itself calm. Vader twists wrists and binds his blade to the glaive, not at the edge, but at the point where the haft joins the head. He tips. The glaive bites earth. He kicks the haft. It does not break. It mentions breaking to itself. The needle stops being theory. A hair-thin seam opens in the air over the armature, and the world behind it is wrong by a degree that throws every measure off. The seam breathes. Wind moves toward it. Men's thoughts lean to it like grass. Holt's blanks set their teeth and add nothing. The choir in the cathedral buttress a kilometre away feels its pitch wobble and drags it back into line with litanies that hurt throats. The glaive comes in for the throat, because that is what men do when the world is about to be unmade. Vader parries and his blade flickers and goes out for a breath. A naked cylinder of durasteel suddenly between him and a blade that hates. The durasteel catches with a noise like a lie told in a church. It bends. It holds just long enough for the blade to return as a cough of light. The return cuts low and opens Rauch above the hip. Not deep, but deep enough that fluid, dark as confession runs. Rauch does not step back. He reaches with the plated arm and touches Vader's shoulder with an open palm. It is not pressure. It is subtraction. The black stone plates drink a strip of field out of the saber's guard, and a strip out of Vader's reach, and a strip out of his resolve, all in one efficient theft. Pain explodes along a nerve that doctors once labeled and thought they had closed. Air stops again. The world dims on the edges. He hears the sound men make when their lungs won't come. He makes it. Rauch leans in, voice a saw that wants to be kind. "Order," he says. "We will give you a universe that does not disobey when told to kneel. We will still the freedom that calls itself chaos and wears colors. We will sand it smooth. You will not remember what was lost. Loss will be illegal." The seam in the air widens a hair like a pupil-loving light. Vader sees a city burned for doctrine and sees it quiet under discipline, and knows which one men call peace when they are tired. He hears an old master's voice in a head he keeps a room for, and crushes the door shut with the last hand that still obeys him. He lets go of the saber for half a heartbeat, and uses that hand on Ralk's face like a clamp. The force meets the null. The null eats. He does not push. He bends. Ralk's helmet lenses rotate with surprise because he assumed all arguments were force against force. The bend is small. It is at the ankle. He takes weight from the wrong muscle and then has to take weight from another wrong muscle, and in those corrections is an opening. Vader takes it and cuts. Not the body, but the cable that snakes from the armature to Ralk's spine like a tail. Light arcs and dies. The needle's breath catches. Men who are leaning toward it lean back. Ralk's answer is not human. He drops the glaive and brings both hands together on the saber's blade, palms drinking its coherence in a hiss that smells like lightning trying to be blood. The saber screams. Its kyber stutters through notes that shouldn't exist. The blade flares and goes thin and fat and thin like a candle in a draft. Vader shoves everything he has left into it, and the blade holds at a length that keeps death honest. He pays in a tremor that starts in machine parts and ends in the ghost of a man who once breathed without assistance. Vask sees Ralk's elbow open a fraction and shoots the plate there. The round should not matter. It matters because men learn where plates meet, and because truth is sometimes a seam too. Ralk flinches. Vader steps inside and brings the saber down on the plated arm and rides the skip until the edge bites meat just past the plates. The smell is like a forge that accepted an offering and disapproved. Ralk lurches away, one arm charred and slow. He staggers under the excavator rib like a penitent seeking shade. The seam hisses with a syllable no human mouth can form. Something huge on the other side flexes a finger. Holt's blanks go to their knees and do not pray because prayer would be contamination. Kest slams her shield down in front of a boy who came to watch and forgot to leave. The boy's hair turns white at the roots in a ring. He laughs with the sound of an adult who had to be brave too often. Vader walks after Ralk like a judge who wants the sentence to be short. The warpsmith turns for one more exchange because men like him believe their gods record final stances as proof of devotion. He thrusts low for the gut. Vader doesn't parry. He turns his torso a hair and lets the glaive pass, a hair's breadth, then brings the saber up through the wrist, through the elbow, through the plates that thinking metal chose. The arm falls. Ralk tries to speak a machine prayer and coughs Noctilith dust. Vader's next cut is for the spine. It takes. Ralk falls the way a statue falls when the crowd finally pulls it off the plinth and pretends to be surprised it breaks. The seam in the air shivers like a dropped coin and tightens, hissing, not closed, wounded, angry. The armature cracks along a weld made with pride and tears itself apart with the tempered violence of equipment failing safe. The wind forgets to lean. Men remember to breathe. Codex note. Noctilith plates tuned to negative coherence will drink a kyber's phase stability on contact. In a duel, the blade's endurance ceases to be infinite and becomes a budget. The victory arrives as silence that feels earned for a single minute. Then the whispering begins. It does not come from outside. It comes from inside the places Ralk's hand touched, and the places the saber's note coughed, and the places where air refused. It speaks in terms that make sense to a man who built his life out of obedience. It says order without grief. It says rule without rebellion. It says a city where mothers never cry because there are no accidents, and no accidents because everyone does exactly what they must. It says a galaxy where there is no need to fear because there is no room left for error, and error is only another word for freedom. Vader stands beside the fallen armature and lets the mask look at wreckage because looking at wreckage is proof of work. The Whisper nicks at the memories he keeps locked behind the furnace door and finds hairline cracks there. It empties a handful of sand through the lock, testing weight. It offers a face he killed his name for, whole and smiling, not a day older than the day he buried it in his chest. And it says, "Choose order, and I will give you the illusion that makes you functional." A child steps into his field of view and breaks the spell by the simple geometry of being real and breathing. She is the blank who stood at the engine earlier, recovered enough to stand and foolish enough to find him when the fight ended, because she thinks proximity to power is safety. Her eyes are a grey that speaks of nothing, and in that nothing the Whisper cannot find a grip. She looks up at the mask and does not flinch, because her nerves do not speak the same language other nerves do. "You're loud," she says, voice hoarse. "It's quieter when you don't look at me." He looks away because she asked, and the Whisper stumbles, as if a hand missed a rung. It returns with better manners. It says, "You can take this planet and make it useful." It says, "The Inquisition will never give you sanction to do what must be done." It says, "Your Emperor at home sits and decays and says yes to everything because he cannot say no." It says, "I will be the no for you." It says, "I will be the yes." Inquisitor Holt arrives with a handful of Arbites and a coiled sanctified chain, breath tight, eyes over bright. Her gaze flicks to the seam, now a white hair against a bruise, and then to Vader. She sees nothing in the mask except her own exhaustion. She has seen men stand on this edge before, psychers at the lip of a well, and she knows how to throw a rope without shaming them in front of themselves. "Circle," she orders, and her acolytes chalk it in ash thick as the width of her palm. "Choir," she says, and voices begin not song, but counting, a litany of numbers that adds up to survival. "Blank here," she says to the child, and the child steps into position as if she were invented for this. The rope goes around Vader in the shape of a geometry the Ordo teaches to children whose parents die for doctrine. It is not binding. It is not a cage. It is a reminder to any presence that the person inside is a person and not a mouth. Holt meets the blank's gaze and nods. The girl nods back and the air thins a little more. The Whisper tries to speak and has to do so through cotton. It says, "Why chain the knife you need?" "Because knives live in sheaths when not in use." Holt answers aloud, not to him, not to it, to the question itself, so it will hear that she knows its grammar, and because speaking is an old magic. Kes plants her shield at the seam's nadir and holds, teeth bared at nothing. The Argmagos stands at the ruined armature and murmurs machine prayers that don't ask for miracles. They ask for tools to not lie. Vader makes his refusal in silence. He does not expand his reach to crush the Whisper, because that would be playing in its pitch. He tightens it the way a man grips a beam to keep a roof off a child. His lungs work like bellows that were left out in rain. The saber hums wrong, then finds itself again. It will never hum exactly as it did. He looks at the seam and not through it. He lets the child be gravity. The hum lowers. The seam knits one more hair. The price arrives on the next breath. The area under the excavator's ribs, where people had taken shelter on instinct, shivers as a fragment of the needle's geometry snaps back in like a rebounding bow. A man turns inside out without blood and is left a shape the brain cannot accept as human. 2 stormtroopers see it and shoot, because the alternative would be screaming, and the shots ricochet into a stack of Prometheum drums the word bearers left as a joke God would appreciate. The drums go. The blast mauls 3 more people who had survived the fight and were starting to stand. Control collateral becomes uncontrolled for 7 seconds that last an hour. Vader does not turn. He cannot turn, because a turn would mean loss of pressure, and loss of pressure would mean the whisper wins. Kest moves instead, roaring, not angry, a roar like a foundry pushing slag, dragging bodies, shoving anyone who can walk out of the blast radius with the flat of her shield. Holt's jaw locks and a vein in her temple jumps, and the chalk circle trembles where her hand was steady. The choir keeps counting, because counting is the only litany left when words taste like metal. A shape falls out of the cloud like a fallen star, remembering it used to be a man. It is not an orbital strike. It is a messenger. The air burns clean around it. It lands on its knees hard enough to crack stone and stands into a figure in gold and red that makes Holt close her eyes for an instant. Not because she is afraid, but because she knows what this will cost later. Sisters of battle do not fall from the sky, but something like one stands now under the broken armature, a banner on her back stiff, in no wind. She is not a living saint. She is an answer built from faith and will, and a little help from a choir that refused to die. Her name is Sister Captain Verena Solis, Order of the Argent Shroud, and she has marched for 3 days without sleeping and prayed on every step. Her arrival is not rescue. It is a sign. She raises a relic blade and points it at the seam. Look away, she tells it. The seam does not obey, because seams do not hear, but the people do. They look away. The whisper loses half its tongue. Verena turns to Vader and gives him the exact nod she would give an Astartes. It contains respect without surrender. Hold, she says. He holds. She faces the blank child and bows a degree lower. Child, she says, you are an answer. The child blinks like a reptile. I'm tired, she says. Be tired after, Verena answers, and turns back to the seam. She does not close it. She plants her relic in the earth and sings a line that comes out of a book her order has kept through 5 cities burning. A line that makes the seam remember it is a line and not a mouth. The storm remembers rain. The whisper fades to a petulant breath at the back of the skull. Holt finishes the circle and seals it with a palm slap that is pure theatre and completely necessary. The choir stops counting and 2 of them vomit. The seam becomes a scar. They stand in the wet quiet after a panic. The wounded groan. The warpsmith lies cut into a problem for scavengers. The crown's hum lowers again by a shade a sleep-deprived tech would mishear as his own blood in his ears. Kest sits down on her shield, because sitting on the ground like a civilian would be too much concession to the idea that she might ever be allowed to stop. Vader straightens a fraction as air decides to be air again. His respirator finds a rhythm it can hold. It is a different rhythm than before. The chest box's lights blink in a new cadence. The saber hangs duller at his side, as if it learned reluctance. He knows the change without looking, because the body he wears is a machine built from bargains, and machines report changes even when men would prefer not to hear them. Holt walks to him and stops a meter away, because closer would be a kind of confession. Her eyes are fever bright, and her voice is paper dry. This is why we bind, she says, not to punish but to record. You stood in front of a mouth and did not fall in. That earns you the right to stand in front of judgment. She looks at Verena. Sister Captain, you witnessed. Verena nods. He held. The blank held. The song was wrong and became less wrong. Kest lifts a hand without looking up. We burned, she says. Not all. Enough. Piet's voice arrives through a channel that crackles like parchment under a candle. We have stabilization at the Interdictor, he reports. The Crown has entered a refractory period. Enemy ships have shifted to harass and harry. We can spare nets to breathe. The Executor's key. He pauses a fraction of a breath because the word does not belong to this galaxy, and then does anyway. Crystal arrays are registering phase noise beyond nominal. We can push, but the cost curve steepens. He does not ask if they should push. He knows what they will say. Hold what you can without making a god out of the ship, Cauldron says into another line, and there is ash in her voice and iron in her words. I have work parties to feed you, or enough to buy us today and part of tomorrow. She looks at the faint white thread up in the cloud where the seam was and squares her shoulders as if to make a horizon out of bone. We prepare the audience. Word comes down like a warrant and like bread. A procession will form tomorrow beneath the cathedral buttress. The Mechanicus will lay wards that smell like ozone and incense. The Order will set blanks in the circle and choir in the nave, and light that makes different shadows where men are used to seeing one. The Arbites will lock the doors from the inside with the look of men who know the secrets they are keeping are bigger than their keys. The governor will stand to witness mercy that has to learn a shape it can keep. Piet sets a detail to scrub and polish a shuttle until it reflects its own light like a clean lie, because presentation is armor when walking into someone else's court. He formats a file with every cost and every list and every deck plate anomaly and tells himself he will hand it to a priest and make them call numbers holy. The Archmagos writes a machine liturgy that is both measurement and confession. He knows he will be judged by math and doctrine and thinks, for once, they might agree. Vader walks the hangar again, slower. He pauses at a workbench where a tech lays out new gasket seals like rosary beads. The tech pretends not to tremble when the shadow falls because pretending is cheaper than fear. The blade, Vader says, and he does not ask, he orders. The tech handles the saber with the reverence men have for knives that bring food or death, and does not open it because he does not know how and does not want to learn a blasphemy. He wipes soot from the emitter and says, it should hum, and then remembers to add, my lord. Vader takes it back and it hums, late, like a man answering a question he wished he hadn't heard. He stops at the blank child's pallet. She sleeps with her eyes half open the way pariahs sometimes do, as if even in sleep they are measuring the world to make sure nothing changed while they weren't looking at it. Holt sits near, back against a pillar, head tilted, eyes closed, mouth reciting litanies without sound. Verena kneels at the breached door and sands ash off a relic's edge with a strip of leather and a prayer. Kest stands in the nave and stares at the ceiling long enough that a lay brother puts a stool behind her without asking, and she does not sit because she is not that kind of tired. Dawn is a rumor again. The clouds over the crown hold their bruise color with old spite. The city smells like wet wires and broth. Vox hymns on different frequencies braid into something that wants to be a single song and fails. The Stormtroopers clean their armor because men need to put shine on something before walking into judgment. The Arbites polish their eagles and scuff the soles of their boots with grit so they don't slip. The Interdictor breathes like a man learning to sleep after a week of war. The Executor's lights flick to a cadence no one scheduled and then back again. An anomaly no one writes down because some days you do not name ghosts. The audience is not a trial. It looks like one. It will feel like one. Holt knows better than to call it anything that gives anyone the impression they can argue with it. Piet knows better than to think a file will move a god. Galdrin knows better than to let her face show how many people she has told today that their dead are not coming back. The Archmagos knows better than to claim ownership of a machine he did not build. They assemble under the buttress. The circle chalked in ash yesterday is repainted in oil and warded in brass. Hexagrammic plates gleam with hammered sigils. Pariah markers stand at the quarters. The choir hums a note without words. Petitioners who are also guards who are also witnesses take their places and force their hands to be still. The shuttle's ramp lowers, and a man in black steps down and dares the circle to be enough. Vader stops at the line and waits for permission, because even tyrants understand that certain rooms have rules. Holt lifts her palm and lowers it. He steps in. The blanks feel him like a storm leaning its weight on a tent. They lean back. The circle warms. The Archimagos' instruments tick like clocks sorted by a bored god. Verena raises her blade and anchors the west. Kest plants her shield at the east and looks like she will bite anyone who says how tired she is out loud. Silence collects. It is the kind of quiet where people hear what they believe. Holt hears the Emperor's breath not as sound, but as the absence of panic. Cauldron hears a clock. Piet hears the ship. The Archimagos hears fans. Vader hears his own machine. Altered. The rhythm is wrong now. Not worse, not better. Different. He offers it the stillness he denied the whisper. He waits. The first pressure is a scan. Gentle by the standards of gods. A taste of his edges. The blanks subtract. The choir binds. He feels something like a gaze from very far away and very near, all at once, like the first time a teacher calls your name in a room where you were sure you were invisible. He does not drop his eyes. He does not lift them. He looks level, because level is the discipline that kept him alive. A voice that is not a voice speaks. It is not words. It is the question behind all words. What are you for? He answers the only way men like him can answer and keep their bones from softening. I am for order. The next pressure is heat at the back of his neck where Rauch's hand touched. Evidence tested for contamination. The blank to the north sways and sets her feet again. Holt's eyes bleed a line at the corner and she ignores it. Verena's gauntlet tightens and she whispers a line that means, keep courage useful. He feels weighed, not judged. Weighed. The balance swings and sets, swings and sets. The machine hum in his chest tries to match it and cannot. Then stops trying. Then finds a harmony a degree off true that is tolerable. If there is disappointment, it is patient. If there is approval, it is private. If there is warning, it is cold and honest. He understands, without words, which is the only way he will believe it, that he will not be permitted to do what his emperor at home permits him. This world's emperor does not negotiate with tools. He blesses or breaks. Sometimes he does both in the same hour. The pressure lifts, not like a door opening, but like a hand taken off a beam after testing its soundness. Holt exhales in a way that shivers and hides it as a cough. The choir stops without a cue because all choirs know when the music ends, even if they never saw the score. The Archimagos looks at his plates and sees numbers that tell a story too ugly and too clean, and nods because truth is a sacrament, no matter whose temple you attend. Vader steps back over the line and the world does not end. It continues. It is worse and better. He has a mandate he did not have before, and a leash he did not like. He knows the length of it approximately. He knows where it will tighten. He knows that where it tightens, men who look like Kest will stand, and he will have to speak to them as if they are his equal for as long as it takes to keep useful quiet. He can live with that. He has lived under worse gods. Outside the buttress, the crown hums and waits. The word-bearers mourn their warpsmith by gluing his teeth into a box and writing on it with a pen made of bone. The dark mechanicum runs new cables through gravel that remembers being mountain and resents being flex conduit. The interdictor holds while men pray to math. The Executor's crew strip and rewire emitters with hands that remember the smell when a field fails and swear to never smell it again. The child blank sleeps without dreaming. Kest finally sits because someone shoved her knees into a bend and she forgot how to argue. The audience has not given absolution. It has given direction. Holt writes 3 lines on a slate and hands it to Piet without drama. Operating limits, she says. No bombardment inside citizen-dense wards without Arbites assent. No sanction of methods that speak to the warp without Ordo oversight. No oaths extracted from civilians on pain of death. Compliance will be purchased in other coin. Piet reads it like a man reading a recipe that feeds a city. We can work, he says. We can live with these. He looks at Vader. The mask gives back silence that counts as agreement. Verena clips her banner back to her spine and salutes a circle that did its job. This wasn't victory, she says. Not to sour the air, but to season it with truth. This was a refusal. We will need a victory. Holt nods once. We will need 3, she says. Cauldron laughs, sharp and tired. I will pay for 1. You 2 find donors for the other 2. The signal goes up again. Quiet this time. A tone across a vox that means, we have work, the day hasn't gone. Men move, women move, servitors move. The city shifts weight. The Executor rolls, a decree that becomes reach. The crown waits. The empire from elsewhere has a leash and a sanction and a rhythm that is off by a beat and learning a new song. In the ash wastes, a Mirror-Foe watches through lenses ground from blackstone and set in brass. A shape built in answer to the man in black, tuned to the flaw the whisper found and failed to exploit. He smiles without humor and tightens a strap. He will intercept a pilgrimage soon, and he will offer optimization. He will be refused. He will leave a wound no one can suture clean. The storm mutters. The camera pulls back. The world keeps turning because it must. The convoy leaves Vigilus like a prayer spoken without boasting. The Executor hangs at center like a blade carried flat in a hand. The Interdictor tucked near enough that their fields whisper to each other. 2 Gothic pattern cruisers prowling ahead like magistrates who know the way through rough streets. A black ship named Quietus glides in their wake, lamps shuttered, hull script smudged by the eyes of 1,000 astropaths. Sisters of silence stand like statues along her spine. Their presence swallows the whisper of the warp like cloth thrown over a mirror. Fuel barges, or luggers, and 2 tugs that look like nothing but can drag a city line up in a curve that is almost regal. Stormtroopers ride in shuttles packed 3 fingers wider than doctrine requires. Arbites sit among them and look like guild carved out of stone. Skitarii crouch with rifles held in hands that don't sweat. The vox is quiet, because quiet is a weapon on a voyage, and everyone knows what the next room requires of them. In the Executor's Medici ward, the air smells of antiseptic and hot metal and fear pressed thin and called readiness. The blank child whose eyes see nothing everyone else sees lies with a blanket to her chin, as if remembering softness might keep a world from using her. A Medicaid tech checks her pulse and writes a number that will mean something later. No dreaming, the child mutters, and the tech looks grateful like a man reprieved for a night. Across the corridor, a servitor polishes a prayer into a screen where Vader's chest box blinks in a rhythm newly learned. A tech priest from a forge 3 walls away lays out tools and does not touch any part of him. I will not bless what is unblessed, he murmurs, and then does the work anyway, because if he does not, the work will kill a city. He notes resonance drift in the emitter array and writes it down as if writing could lift weight. In chapel, under a light that refuses to flicker, Inquisitor Holt and Sister Captain Verena stand close enough to be mistaken for allies and far enough to remember they aren't. A candle fights a draft and loses with dignity. Cost, Holt says, palms on a pew like a craftsman testing grain, is counted in souls and in doctrine. I will not buy this world with a debt that breaks the next 10. Verena's helm sits on the bench like a skull used well. Dogma teaches us where costs become sins, she answers. Refusal kills too. Call it by its name so you don't sanctify paralysis. You would give sanction to a blade you cannot sheathe, Holt returns soft. I will not give birth to what I cannot bury. Verena's eyes are bright and tired. You speak of graves. I ask for walls, locks. Her palm brushes the hilt of her relic like men touch icons when no one is watching. We can bind a storm without killing the ocean. Holt's mouth firms. If the ocean decides to call itself emperor. Verena doesn't smile. Then I will drown in a law I chose. Not one whispered to me by something that wants to convert me into inventory. Vader pauses in the chapel door, because men make space when he enters, and this is not a room he holds ownership over. He listens to two languages tell the same story and walks on. His boots make a noise the ship has learned to treat as calibration. Piet's map shows a corridor through the ash of space, spotted with dates and small skulls, and a single star painted gold by a cartographer who had a moment of hope 2 centuries ago. We will sideslip, he says to his nav crew. Short burn hyper-translation at the points I mark. Use the interdictor as anchor and lens. Treat the Kyber arrays as finite. No glory mathematics. We are not on parade. Short burns taste like blood at the back of the tongue and leave hairline cracks in instruments made for smooth leaps. The crew develop headaches that make the world 2 degrees off level. The ship's spine complains with voices too small to log, and engineers who know what complaint means tighten couplings until their knuckles bleed. An astropath aboard Quietus sings the first 5 lines of a hymn, and then cannot remember the 6th and weeps until a sister's gaze makes weeping seem like an indulgence, and she stops. They hold a Medicae round for the men, who will be nearest the wards when they arrive. Blank markers are painted onto the floor to remind everyone where not to stand. The Archmagos walks the marks like dowsing rods and nods twice. The geometry will hold, he says, not to comfort anyone, but to satisfy a thing in himself that requires art to behave. Midway to the fortress world slated for judgment, space knots into a deliberate riddle. Distant stars smear, then freeze, then smear. The Quietus shudders as if someone walked a wet finger around the rim of a ball. Gravity signatures, a navigator calls. Not wells, nails. The interdictor's nets bow like ropes loaded wrong. The executor's deflectors take a deep breath and hold it. They come in masked by math, ships with hulls like armored prayers, each plated with blackstone scales burnished to a matte that eats sensor light. They fly in a lattice that refuses interception. Their prows carry hooks that are not rams. They are assertions. At their center drifts a gun barge braced like a reliquary, Gothic ribs plated in a lacquer gold that catches no gleam. Its prow bears no sigil of chaos, no purity seal of the true creed. It bears a badge in the shape of a shuttered eye. A voice goes on the open band with a confidence that either comes from rank or insanity. Convoy, it says, and the word is almost affectionate. You travel with witches, with a machine that hates blessing, and with a man whose breath draws ghosts. I am Prefect Luthvaer of the Penitus Null. I offer optimization. Holt's teeth click once on the ridges of a prayer she doesn't say. Verena's breath ticks louder in her helm like patience on a thin leash. Piet goes very still, because a tone like that is the opening sentence of an ultimatum. Fire descends in a corvette that kisses the Quietus' spine with the care of a surgeon laying tools on silk. He walks out onto a lathed ramp, a silhouette inside a frame of gold-lacquered exo-armor. Cables run into the frame from a crown that is not a crown the way Vader's mask is not a face. The crown shards drink light in neat, measured greed. Sisters of silence watch him without moving, and the air around them flattens until breath is work. You cut a needle in the wastes, Veer says, voice mild through a grill that does nothing to soften it. Your flaw is control at cost of self, Lord of Order. I am its correction. Severance brings peace. Imagine duty without whisper, choice without temptation. I can still the sea you bend with your will. I can fasten you inside quiet. The crown's null vector ripples, and the Quietus's astropaths curl like ash in wind. The sisters bear it like punished statues, and do not reach for him because reaching is considered a chord. Kest stands to the right of the ramp with her shield canted, and a baton that isn't designed for boarding actions, held the way a builder holds a hammer, when a nail tells him it is a screw. He offers erasure, she says, not loudly. Men call that peace, usually right before they drown. Holt steps one pace forward, and her null escort undeploys behind her, like a concept sharpened into weapons. Prefect Veer, she answers. Your offer presumes the right to alter what is no longer yours to touch. He is sanctioned to stand before the throne, not before your surgery. Vaya's visor tilts toward the Executor's mooring clamps like a man glancing at a knife on a table. You sanction war when it points the way you prefer, he says. I sanction tools. The Imperium has too many saints and too few clean edges. What will you bind when null is the only sacrament left? He gestures, lazy as a cat, and the crown's radius swells. Vader feels pressure on his lungs akin to a hand inside his chest turning a dial. The saber at his belt hums a question, and then gives up on asking. He steps onto the ramp without drawing it. He does not project. Projection is useless here. He gauges width, angle, weight. The ramp vibrates faintly in a frequency that milks blood from soft tissue over hours. His boots lock with a choice that will not be reversed without an order from a brain older than his current life. Vaya lifts a palm that is all joints and math. Accept correction, he says. You were made for it. Vader closes the distance to a meter because a meter is the only distance left when you refuse to move backward. He strikes with his left hand at the pivot point in Veer's parietal plating where wires converge. There is no strength to it beyond human, because human is what the room allows. The blow lands with the brutal intimacy all cheap fights share. Veer stumbles a quarter step, and his crown sings back at him in a key only machines claim they understand. He laughs once, delighted because someone remembered a language he thought lost. The first exchange is hands and edges. Veer's null field fuzzes the edges of everything. Reality feels misprinted. Vader takes a strike to the shoulder that would have punched a hole through any other man's frame. It hits his armor, ripples through a dozen suspensions, and ends in a pain that is not new but always personal. He returns a jab to the crown ring that jostles one Noctilith shard in its setting. Sparks skitter in a pattern that makes an astropath gag within the black ship, and a sister look up with interest that is almost, but not, approval. Below them, the sisters form a circle that is not centered on either man. They stand around Quietus's aft spine and face outward. Their silence deepens until the ship's machine spirit shows words on every interior screen. Quiet. The astropaths stop whimpering as if a door shut. Holt raises a palm to Piet and Verena, both in a gesture that says, "Do not fire, even when firing would be clean. We cannot solve this with light." Vaya shifts his offense to predicates. "You are a machine that learned pity and called it weakness," he says, diving inside the reach where the saber would have been. "I will take pity away. You will do what you were made to do and sleep." Vader catches the strike on the braced ridge of his forearm, because weapons are not required when you know how to lay body against body without mercy. "I do not sleep," he replies. and the breath makes it sound like a weapon. The Interdictor's wells flex at Piet's soft command. He does not crush any ships. He pulls the ramp 1 degree hard to port. Gravity stutters, and the men on it slide a handspan. Vaya's stance is perfect until the grid beneath him decides to become a suggestion. He checks with the grace of a man who is trained in moving rooms. Vader does not move. The ramp corrects. Veer is forced to respect math not his own, and his crown's null circles shift as they compensate. Verena lifts her relic blade and points it at nothing, then above, then at the crown. She does not strike. She holds the blade at that angle for a count and prays with her shoulders. The words are plain. By the light that lets men love law without loving chains, hold. The black ship's wards glow for a span so thin, only men in the habit of seeing weakness in furnaces perceive it. Vaya's field dips. Vader takes that dip and makes it into subtraction. The saber leaps to his hand and flickers like a tired pilot light, and then burns hard for 3 breaths. He does not aim for Vaya. He aims for the crown's anchor couplings. Light meets Noctilith with a sound like bone saw on steel. 1 coupling fails and the crown drops 1/2 centimeter. The null changes tone from confident to annoyed. Vaya's answer is a backhand that embeds a null sigil in the shoulder plate across a seam the Medici would have preferred untroubled. Vader accepts the pain as necessary tax on an adjustment he wanted anyway. Piet knows he will not get 10 more breaths with the saber burning like that. He gestures at the Interdictor's net like a conductor, and a ripple meets the gold-lacquered gun barge's keel. Its grav plates answer with humility they were not built to feel. The barge dips a handspan and throws the ramp's balance off again. Vaya takes a knee because no man stands inventing his own gravity twice without cost. He regains it with the offended dignity of a priest interrupted in the middle of a well-planned homily. The divine sign is not thunder. It is an absence of wrong that shows up the wrong by contrast. The Astronomican song swells through Quietus in a line that makes words easy to say for 9 heartbeats. The custodian of a relay on the fortress world ahead touches a switch he has been trained never to touch, and a beam the color of verdict washes the convoy's skin. It does not scorch, it does not heal. It reminds everyone what up feels like. Veer's crown keens like a tuning fork held against granite, and his null field gutters in ragged segments like a lantern caught in wind. He looks up, and for the first time, there is something like a man's face under his visor, not a doctrine. "Of course," he says, and the mildness goes bitter as old tea. He steps back, and the golden corvette peels itself off Quietus as cleanly as it arrived. "We will speak again, when churches are quiet," he says on the open band. "You will prefer my optimization when you've counted enough dead." He leaves as if refusing is his idea, which is the only way men like him can live. They reach the fortress world under a sky so clear it feels like a trick. Guns the size of negligence ring its orbits. A void citadel that looks like a nail driven into the nightlights clean. The planet feeds their eyes a pageant as carefully planned as a parade. Spur-carried courier craft sweep the vector for malice. Choir towers open their shutters and show astropaths at windows with cloth over their eyes and blood wiped carefully away, so no one will read the wrong liturgy in it. The black ship glides toward a receiving cradle shaped like a chalice. The Executor angles for low orbit, as if trying not to cast too long a shadow over a cathedral that throws its own. The cathedral structure spreads like a hive for saints. Nave spires spread in a star, transepts wide enough that transports could land on them and perhaps have. Statues of martyrs dot the colonnades. Each is a lesson, none is delicate. Gold glints off armor where you do not expect to see gold. because men who guard thrones need to remind their eyes why their sleep is a weapon. Custodians stand in a line that does not curve for anyone. Their spears hum with the idea of injury. Beside them, ranks of Sisters of Silence form a wall that is as polite as a guillotine blade kept oiled. The procession from the shuttle could be called pageantry if the men walking cared about any word but order. Holt walks at the fore, with Verena at her right, and Kess behind like a door that learned to walk. The Archimagos floats a half-pace above stone. Mechadendrites retracted, because this is a room where too many hands looks like greed. Governor Cauldron walks with her head high and her palms open, because the only thing to show on them is work. Piet brings up the rear with a portfolio that contains numbers and the will to spend them. Vader steps down, and the Golden Guard step a line forward as one their size shouldn't be able to perform. Their captain's face is a study in neutrality that makes lesser men want to apologize for existing. Blanks set their feet at the corners of the first antechamber. A custodian by the door says nothing and everything, spear point dipping a degree that could be welcome, could be warning, could be nothing but ritual. He turns and the procession follows, because in rooms like this, the first direction you receive is obedience. They pass relics that would feed a frontier planet for a year if melted down. They are not melted because meaning is more valuable than grain in some rooms. Choirs hum without words because words would make this too easy to understand. The path ends at a chamber that is not a throne room and not a throne room. At its center stands a dais with a shallow curve hollowed, as if meant to hold a bowl. The bowl is the point in space where voices gather when men insist on hearing what God does not say. "Stop," says a voice that has no origin. It is a woman's voice and a man's voice and an old voice and a new one and none of those things. It is a room that decided to speak. Holt drops to a knee because the body remembers what the soul wants, and sometimes that is allowed. Verena's head bows until the point of her plume touches her collar. Kest goes down on one knee only and does not lower her head, because her oath is to law, not to sound. Piet stands as straight as a man can stand without insulting someone else's god. The Archimagos flickers. His machine heart shuts off a noise it makes when the unknown enters a network. Vader stands. The light in the bowl brightens from black to grey, to a colour no one taught him in any spectrum. Sunlight squeezed through gold and through blood, and through a lie that has been used so long, it is now a working tool. The pressure against skulls is politely immense. It does not ask for assent. It assumes. Blank presence subtracts the worst from the first wash of it, and in the subtraction is the room for words. What are you for? The question arrives without grammar, and without malice, and without mercy. He answers because men like him cannot tolerate being unread. I am for order. The pressure doubles at the edges, and then eases at the center like a hand that tests a plank, finds it holds, and shifts weight to the next one. What will you break to keep it? The answer takes longer. Men like him pride themselves on never having to think. Anything, says the part of him that first obeyed out of love. Not everything, says the part that has learned what collateral tastes like on a child's hair. The silence that follows is either approval or the beginning of a list. A presence brushes the place in his chest that tries to remember how to call pain by its given name. It finds fracture lines left by Noctilith and by hands that offer correction in the shape of erasure. It leaves a mark that is not pain and is not comfort, and will make decisions cost more later. Holt feels the room give her a glance. It is like being told by a hurricane that it is aware of your roof. Verena hears scripture without a noun and a verb, and knows she is not mishearing. Kest feels the click in her jaw that comes when a sentence she's about to hear will require a better posture. The numinous exchange is not question and answer. It is packets of weight moved between bodies. It is a mandate written on the inside of a shell that will crack when struck in exactly the right place later. It does not promise help. It offers company in the form of attention. It does not promise love. It promises notice. In the Imperium, notice is the currency men live and die for, because the alternative is being ground into paste by a mill that never bothers to aim. The light dims with the finality of a door closing on a room you are permitted to re-enter only when you have something new worth saying. Air pours back in. The blanks sway and do not fall. Holt stands and wipes blood from one ear and does not look at her hand, because looking makes it real. Piet lets half a breath out between his teeth and makes no sound. Verena kneels another heartbeat, and then stands because kneeling too long turns devotion into theatre. Kest lifts her shield 2 millimeters and sets it back down, because even in rooms like this she protects. Power scaling interlude. 2. Under mandate, orbital fire is bound by law words that are not negotiable. Bombardment inside citizen dense wards requires dual assent. Arbites and ordo, no substitutes. The Kyber harmonics that fused hypermath to this galaxy's storms are now indexed to local limits. Prolonged use near Noctilith shortens the blade's endurance and pulls pain from old channels into new ones. The Interdictor can hold gravity against warp-sheared corridors for hours, not days, before emitters heat beyond faith or coolant. The Force answers inside a null's cone only as memory. Vader must work with matter when close to blanks and cages. Custodian eyes are now on every significant action. A golden spear moves when the mandate is broken, and it will move faster than any ship. They leave the chamber changed in a way only instrument panels can measure, and only later, when a choice comes, men can feel. A Lex mechanic hands hold to slate that did not exist before and now does. It contains 3 clauses edged in brass. She reads, mouth a straight rule. Boundaries, she says to herself. Verena doesn't ask to see. She will be the one who says when violating a line can be called virtuous without lying. Piet copies the clauses into a folder under the name Operations, Mercy, and he already sees which captains will bend and where. On the way across the transept, a custodian steps to block Vader with a movement as minimal as a gate swing. His face is a geometry an artist could use to teach the concept of not flinching. You will be watched, he says without the heat of threat. You will be expected. Vader inclines his head, and the gesture says, we understand instruments. We are both of us tuned. The custodian steps aside like a door that counts those who pass. They do not get to enjoy the pageant. A runner arrives with the speed of tragedy and the breathing of a man running in someone else's dream. The crown, he pants. It grows teeth. Astropathic flares sketch a picture in air quick as a bad painter and then smear. On Vigilus, the humming rises to a keening pull through metal. Nighttime over the hive is bidden open by spikes of dark that are not darkness. People cut their hands on nothing. Holt's back straightens until the air hums around her. We have the mandate, she says, and the word carries weight, because rooms like this make pocket universes in which words are tools. Verena's jaw flexes. We have the right to be sharp. Piet doesn't look at anyone. He turns on his heel like a man whose time was spent long ago and who is grateful for the chance to spend again. Kest is already half down the steps because waiting is a crime when somebody is dying. Vader breathes. The sound in the mask is a furnace door opening and closing on a clock. His blade hums in his hand. It is different now. It feels like a pen after being used to sign a law. He walks toward the shuttle. He does not look at the custodian again. He does not look back at the bowl. He will return when the universe writes its next unavoidable clause and someone refuses to sign. The convoy flicks space again, gentler this time, as if new numbers have taught the ship manners. The black ship rides a little closer to the Executor, as if a woman walking in a dark street stepped nearer to the man with the knife and the better map. The Interdictor holds a swathe of gravity steady, like a hand on a child's shoulder in a crowd. The path home is shorter, because hope always lies about distance in this Imperium, and men will accept any lie if it means there is still a path. In Vigilus's sky, the Crown writes its joke with patience and Noctilith. The word-bearers place their lips to the amplifier again, and again, and again. Prefect Veer stands at a glass altar in a cutter over the wastes and watches the black shards rise, and his crown hums an argument he means to win. He thinks of the golden bowl and files it under interference. He thinks of the man in black and files him under tool. The city prepares to refuse one more time. Holt draws circles on plans the Arbites hold steady. Verena says a prayer and calls it a plan, so God will listen to it. Cauldron signs papers authorizing theft from nobles and calls it emergency requisition. The Archmagos stands under a tower that isn't a tower yet and teaches stones how to hum wrong notes on purpose. The Executor darkens the clouds, and the people below it look up and decide again to call that shade a shelter. The ramp lowers. The smell is the same as before and a little different, like a house that was cleaned after a night when all the dishes were dropped. Vader walks out, and the world, which has decided to keep turning, does so without asking him what he wants. He approves. He does not say so. The crown opens like a jaw, not fast, not showy, decisive. Black teeth grow from gravel and slot into sockets that weren't there a day ago. Vox feet stammer in tones men don't teach machines, panic learned. Word-bearers arrive without trumpets, just red shapes shouldering through ash, bearing icons that sour air. Prefect Veer shadows above them in a gold lacquer cutter, crown humming a neat threat over a choir of dirty miracles. Vader steps onto basalt that remembers mountain. His blade hums wrong, then true enough. The Interdictor lays nets like careful hands setting bone. The Executor holds its breath because rooms with wards have rules and ships can learn piety under pressure. Holt draws chalk on stone and sets blanks like pegs to pin a storm. Verena prays with her back straight. Kest tests a shield edge with a thumb and decides it can survive one more hour. The world narrows. No trumpet, no flash. Just a tilt in time like the first step of a fall that lasts an instant too long. The bowl's light is not here and is here. Memory and mandate overlap like vellum. 3 roads open where sand was, as clean as diagrams drawn by a patient teacher. The first is return. He sees the Executor fold space back toward a galaxy where his Emperor wears a different sun, and the seam pays with memory. Faces blur. The lesson of Vigilus turns to heat haze. Holt's name slips. Kest's shield becomes an object without a story. Power returns unbound, but the cost is truth. He becomes a tool that forgets why it was sharpened. The sky quiets for his fleet. The world he leaves freezes into rumor. The second is free agent. He sees himself remove insignia and claim mandate without petition. Piet follows because loyalty is not a uniform, and soldiers follow because order is a hunger. Worlds fall into line that never met a creed they respected. Holt becomes an enemy who won't admit kinship. Verena prays for him as one prays for a knife. The schism kills fewer people than the enemy expected, and more than he can count in one sitting. He wins a piece of empire that cannot survive beyond him. The third is Sanctioned Servant. He sees chains drawn as burins draw lines, dual ascent for fire, blanks in every circle, oaths pulled from the necks of citizens, only if law binds first, math under audit, a golden spear ready to move when doctrine bends. He sees his blade ringed in brass etched with limits. He sees mercy printed on paper and stamped with seals so it can survive men. He sees victory slower and cleaner where clean is not possible, and he sees the habit of clean survive him. He picks the only path that does not flatter him. He does not speak. The choice writes itself where old pain lives, not as comfort but as form. The tilt ends with an ugly breath. The crown's hum shifts frequency like a lyre adjusting charm. Vader's cutter snaps closer. Null nails unfolding like tidy teeth. The word-bearers raise a city of ribs from gravel. A choir engine at its heart whispering a sentence that wants to become a paragraph. The ground flows, not lava, but blackstone slurry, fed by rigs that should not know that song. Hard anchor the wells, Piet orders, throat rough, as the Interdictor's projectors sweat themselves honest. Hold drift at 2 degrees. If they make teeth, we make gravity. The nets bite. The crown's new spires bow an imperceptible hair. Machines everywhere complain in languages too small to log. Buy rid of Vigilus and the audience, Holt says on wideband, voice steady for 100,000 ears. Mercy is now a liturgy shaped by law. Boundaries are these. No orbital fire within citizen-dense wards, without Arbites and Ordo ascent. All engagements with witchwork shall be circled with blanks and hexagrammics. No forced oaths from civilians. Compliance will be purchased with corridor and bread. Foreign machines interface under Mechanicus audit only. Any man or woman who casts down weapon at first warning enters Arbites process, not pyre. She doesn't ask if men obey. She counts on habits laid over terror. Received, Piet answers, and routes the words into targeting logic. He tells guns to prefer the gap in doctrine to the gap in armor. Affirmed, Verena adds, and sets a procession of sisters to carry stretchers instead of torches. Kest hammers a baton against her shield, and men hear a judge's tempo, not a drum. Vader moves. He does not aim to slaughter. He aims to break the geometry. He leads a wedge, Stormtroopers, Arbites, Skitarii, through a field of rebar stubs uprooted by the crown's rise, toward a set of pylons the color of old nightmares. Holt's blanks stand at intervals like missing teeth in a comb, subtracting sky from the place where men would otherwise drown. Vader dips his cutter and plucks at a line only he hears. Null pressure rises clean as a thought. The saber coughs. Vader holsters it without drama and picks up a cable coil that a Skitarius carried, slinging it over a blackstone bracket, the way a lineman throws a rope. He uses his weight, not power, and the bracket cracks with the sound of a boast corrected. He feels the force flicker at the edge of a cone and ignores it because matter is honest here. A word bearer. Dark Apostle tries to make art of slaughter. His sermon becomes a hacking when Kest stamps him in the throat with a boot and makes Holiness breathe mud. Skitarii cuts Scrapco carriers at the joints. Del Vask plants charges where chalk says critical and where instinct says better. The plan is simple enough to survive contact. The Interdictor pulls the crown's new teeth half a degree toward a flood mine abandoned 3 wars ago and filled with brine. The Executor pushes air against that pull until the brine foams at the lip. Portable pylons, hissing with borrowed hymns, sing discord into the crown's song. The stones, offended, resonate with themselves, not with the word-bearer's metronome. Gravity does the rest. Teeth shear on their own fulcrums and slide into a salt throat designed by time to eat ambition. Veer dives to pin the motion with a null. His crown flares. Quiet spreads in a ring that makes the Interdictor's wells go furry at the edges. Holt reads drift on a slate and speaks 5 numbers and 2 words. The Archmagos hears them and writes a counter-hum into shield pylons that not even his cult would name prayer, and the fuzz sharpens into a line again. Vader reaches the choir engine at the City of Ribs and finds a face there, young, anesthetized by devotion, singing a syllable that burns lungs. He doesn't kill the boy. He slaps a seal over the engine mouth, Mechanicus brass printed with an aquila and a cog, and says nothing as sound shudders and falls, forced to remember it is vibration before it is faith. Mercy here is engineering. He leaves the boy alive because the boy drops the knife, and because Holt's law is in his ear, and because the habit he chose fits his hand. The crown chokes, spires topple with a dowager's offence. The brine takes stone and stone hisses. The choir engine buckles while trying to find its pitch in a room that stopped making sense. The word-bearers backstep in a cohesion that reads as respect for a foe, not panic. They leave relics to slow pursuit. Arbites mark them, Stormtroopers leap them, Skitarash shoot them. Sisters carry them aside because killing metal is not the same as killing men. Vare's cutter lances down one last time. No words now, just precision. It spears the Interdictor's nearest well with a nail so thin no map knows it. The well stutters. Space forgets where it put itself. A shuttle in the wrong place disintegrates in a tidy silence that hurts ears. Piet feels the hole as a finger between ribs, and does not swear. Shift wells to beta ring, he says. Hold on the brine. Do not chase the cutter. We are not here to win a duel in the sky. Vader looks up. He could call Veer down. The Force can still reach in thin threads where null cannot focus. He doesn't. He puts both hands on a strangled spar and pulls until something in his shoulder grinds and then falls into a new, honest alignment. Metal yields. The spar falls. The last working pylon snaps. A piece of the crown the size of a basilica remembers gravity's first lesson and slides into the mine with the decorum of an old tyrant falling downstairs. The hum drops to a petulant quiver. Prefect Veer's voice returns, not to audience but to him alone, crawling under the mask like a spider that thinks it learned subtlety. Optimization deferred, he says, almost cheerful. You will come to it when you tire of petition. Vader answers with static and breath because some men only understand refusal when it is impersonally delivered. The cost arrives, as it must. The null that held perfect for the last neat strike skews, and a pulse slips between blanks and pylons and hymns. It snakes through armor seams and finds the breath machine, and the glove with the ghost of a hand in it. Pain sharp as old learning punches through his chest and makes the world dark around the edges. He's down on one knee because to fall flat would break the geometry of the circle behind him. He doesn't fight it with reach, he fights it with repetition. Holt is at his shoulder without crowding and without offering a human hand, because a human hand would be incorrect here. Stand, she says, as if reciting an oath. Verena's blade points at the sky and does not move because stillness is what men need to see now. Kest holds a line that is not a wall, but looks like one from a peasant's eye. Del Vask checks the charge counts and marks the one he won't live to use with a thumbprint that becomes, in his head, a signature. The pulse passes. The machine coughs, then finds its rhythm. The new one inherited in the audience, like a choir picking up after a skipped bar. The crown sulks in salt. Vara rises to a safe altitude with the look of a craftsman who saw a mistake he will not repeat. The word-bearers withdraw with the offended dignity of men who prepared for a sacrifice and did not get to perform it. It does not end with cheering. It ends with silence thick enough to spread like butter. Stormtroopers kneel beside bodies that used to be problems and now are paperwork and loss. Arbites clip restraints on cultists who let their knives fall and do it without triumph. Skitarii process data, like mourners counting the dead, thoroughly without art. Sisters carry stretchers past icons smeared in ash. Holt scratches a line through a plan, and the line looks like relief and like grief on the same page. Purging starts where victory always starts here, with work. The Archmagos and his collegia wrap the Executor's pylons in unelectro cages and bleed scrap code into circles etched with numbers that would make a lesser priest fear math. Medicae lance steel splinters from a shoulder that remembers older surgeries and seal them with oils blessed by men who bless engines. The choir burns their throats clean with vinegar and prayer and then drink water, and that too is a rite. The blank child sleeps with her hand on a purity seal someone forgot to remove from a crate. The seal warms and then cools, and no one calls it a sign, because restraint is a virtue taught by fatigue. He walks into the nave when the air has stopped tasting like lightning and numbers. Light from a broken clerestory paints dust in clean shafts. Holt stands before him with a document in brass and skin. 2 seals hanging, one rasped, one smooth. Verena stands to her right, gauntlets washed, plume combed. Kest stands to her left, shield face polished, baton stowed. Piet stands behind them with a ledger he will quote in sleep. The Archmagos floats at angle, as if honouring gravity by a degree. By the audience and the clause of boundaries, Holt says, voice stripped of theatre. We confirm the third path. You will act as sanctioned servant within Vigilus and adjunct theatres under Ordo oversight and Arbites assent. Your strikes will prefer precision to terror. Your ships will submit bombardment plans inside wards to dual approval. Your machines will accept audit on interfaces. Your blade will be circled when witchwork is in question, and your reach will be tested where blanks stand. You will offer corridor before fire where a corridor can exist. You will not extract oaths from civilians as purchase for air. You will do violence as a function, not a creed. She pauses, because pauses let law breathe. Do you accept the leash you asked for? I accept, he says, and the breath turns it into an engine's promise, not a man's. Verena steps forward with a strip of red wax warmed on a little iron. She presses it to the corner of his chest box and stamps it with a sigil that is none of the cults, and all of them. Aquila wings crossed under a circle of bars like the cog of his own order. Brass braces ring the saber's emitter with etched words that are not scripture, not quite, mercy under order. Kest unclamps a small, battered Aquila from her shield's rim and magnetizes it to the pauldron below his throat, where men can see it when they are about to decide whether to drop a knife. The Archmagos affixes a cog-tooth plaque to a pylon actuator with seals that tell any machine spirit reading. This blade lives here under rules. Piet salutes, hand crisp, not to a god, but to a commander under conditions that honor both. Holt nods, not heresy, not submission. Just a statement that says, we will hold you to this, and that is love in our language. Codex note. Mandatum Vigilus 3 authorizes a sanctioned servant to project force under dual authority within warded hives, binding precision, audits, and blank circle witchwork as operating law. The enemy hears it in different ways. The word bearers collect Rorke's teeth, write new verses about salt, and inscribe Vader's name into a couplet that twists mercy to read as concealment. They promise the crown will rise again, where men are too proud to flood it. The Dark Mechanicum logs the brine's effect on Noctilith and drafts devices to desalinate convictions. Prefect Veer writes a memorandum titled Optimization, deferred with perfect penmanship, and files it in a drawer that opens only when certain kinds of blood have dried. He adds a note. crown redesign, modular, resilient to brine, attractor nodes tuned to audit lag. Within the Imperium, ripples, an Ordo Hereticus tribunal in a different sector chews on the word sanctioned as if it were a bone. A custodian writes in a book that is not parchment and not screen. Tool under watch. Acceptable variants observed. Forge masters in 2 forges send feelers to Mechanicus Collegia on Vigilus, offering bolts of blessed logic in exchange for a copy of the pylon hymns. And the city. The city learns the new drill. Siren, corridor, shield, shoulder. Soup lines move under white armor without spitting mostly. A catechist changes one line in a children's hymn. Mercy first, then ordnance. The kids sing it once, twice, and it begins to stick. An Arbites precinct paints on its door a symbol that is not authorized and isn't unauthorized yet. Aquila split by a circle of bars, a harsh geometry that says, here, violence obeys paperwork. He visits the mine once more, not to preside or to preen, but to see the hole filled with salt and broken teeth. He stands at the lip and breathes like a god that learned to count. The blank child appears like a fact arriving. It's quieter when you're tired, she says offhand, curious. It's easier to work, he answers. She nods as if that were a philosophy worth putting in a book. They light the sky that night not with fireworks, but with search beams. The Executor's dorsal banks throw a pale fan over the cathedral, and the cathedral returns it with lanterns, strung like a constellation, pulled down into a neighborhood. On a smelter roof, a boy looks up at the new badge painted on a shuttle's flank. The wings and the cog circle together, and says, in a voice that tastes uncertain and hopeful both, our Emperor. His mother's hands pause on a bowl. Our sky, she says. For now, that is enough. The epilogue arrives like a roster, not a hymn. Piet files operations, quiet sky, across 3 hives and 1 railhead. And for 12 days, the report lines show more living than dead. Holt writes a memo to a far judge with no seal except truth. Leverage holds, leash holds, watch holds. Verena signs her name to a casualty list and adds a postscript. The girl held the circle twice, request rest, not promotion. Kest sits in a cell doorway and shares bread with a man who will face law tomorrow and does not spit. The Archmagos archives a hymn written in base 2 and labels it with a saint's name he refuses to share. Veer watches stars at the edge of the system and adjusts his crown 1 notch tighter. He smiles the way engineers do when they think they have solved a problem an enemy doesn't know is a problem. The word-bearers build a small, precise cathedral to failure and call it a lesson. The first sermon ends with a vow to break a law written in brass. The last image is not a mask in a hall. It is a symbol stitched onto a cloak's hem by a hapwoman with good hands. A circle of bars around wings, inked with soot and steadied with red thread. It flaps from a ramp as a shuttle lifts to draw fire away from a block where children sleep. If you stand on the roof where the man first asked, which god emperor, you can see it for a breath and decide that names are important later. For now, the sky is quiet enough to hear your own lungs. For now, mercy has rules. For now, the blade is leashed and sharp.